Why does life feel like it's on repeat? What if it's not bad luck, but tiny choices you don't even notice? In this journey, we'll explore 100 daily decisions, small, silent patterns that quietly trap you in unhappiness. Each one will open your eyes just a little wider, even as they gently close for sleep. Let's begin with level 1, dot, dot. Imagine yourself in a quiet room. The morning light hasn't quite arrived. Your alarm goes off. Not sharply, but with a familiar hum that blends into the silence. Your hand reaches almost automatically and finds the snooze button. Just 9 more minutes. A small postponement. A harmless delay. But this delay is not as simple as it feels. In that gesture lies a pattern, one that subtly trains your mind to prefer retreat over response. The snooze button offers softness, a cushion from the day. But it also weakens something else, the thread between intention and action. Centuries ago, farmers rose with the light, monks with the bell. Waking wasn't optional, it was rhythm. There was no button to bargain with time. But now, each press of snooze is a quiet vote against discipline. You may not notice the change at first, but like water on stone, repetition reshapes resolve. Sleep scientists call it sleep inertia, the heavy fog that follows interrupted rest. When you dip in and out of sleep, the mind grows sluggish, confused. The body wakes, but the will remains curled under the blanket. Each delay deepens that gap. And so, a day begins not with momentum, but with resistance. The habit forms slowly. It feels small, but the effect echoes into productivity, mood, and even identity. You are not just snoozing the alarm, you are postponing clarity. Not forever, just for now. But if every just for now repeats, what rhythm are you really choosing? Imagine yourself stirring awake in the gentle gray before dawn, eyelids still heavy, breath slow and unmeasured. The world beyond the blanket is quiet, still forming. For a brief, suspended moment, you exist without identity, neither worker nor parent nor name in a feed, just presence. But then, almost by reflex, your hand reaches sideways. The screen lights up, bright and blue, flooding your senses before your body even remembers how to sit upright. Notifications stack like fallen leaves, each one a thread pulling you into 100 other lives. A message, a headline, an image. And just like that, your morning is no longer yours. In the early 2000s, the first smartphones were novelty items, tiny windows to the web, used occasionally, cautiously. But by the 2010s, they became alarm clocks, newsrooms, town squares, and mirrors. Waking up became a moment not of stillness, but of sudden demand. Before the mind could fully rise, it was already digesting stock prices, global disasters, acquaintances' breakfasts. And in that blur of scrolling, the boundary between internal and external softened, quietly eroded. Studies on early morning phone use show that cortisol, your stress hormone, spikes almost immediately upon exposure. The brain, designed to move from rest to alertness in a gradual arc, is instead launched into reactive mode. Over time, this trains a person to expect interruption, to anticipate urgency, to live in a state of fragmented awareness. But long before the screen, morning held ritual. People once woke to birdsong or firelight, to the scent of warm bread or the rustle of paper. There was a moment to remember who they were, where they'd left off, and what mattered that day. A quiet inspection of thought before letting the world in. Now imagine waking again, but this time without the screen. Let the light find you slowly. Let the world wait. The digital tide can return later. For now, reclaim that fragile, fleeting moment of being no one but yourself. Imagine waking up with a faint hesitation you can't explain. You're about to reply to a message, agree to a plan, walk into a room, but something inside pulls gently against the motion. Not loud, not urgent, just a quiet signal, easily missed. That's your inner voice, the part of you that senses patterns before they form, discomfort before it has a name. For most of human history, this voice was essential. It helped us survive in forests, tribes, unfamiliar terrain, a pause before danger, a shiver before a storm. But today, we call it overthinking, or worse, irrational. We trade it for convenience, schedules, and data. We over-explain what we feel until we forget that feeling came first. Your inner voice doesn't need proof. It notices what you overlook. A glance too long, a silence too sharp, a promise that feels slightly hollow. And when you ignore it, you don't just lose a decision. You lose a thread of yourself. You let the noise decide, not the knowing. The more often you dismiss it, the quieter it becomes. Not because it was wrong, but because it wasn't welcomed. And over time, you drift further from that ancient part of yourself that never needed words to understand. But the voice is still there, waiting in the stillness between thoughts. A compass, not a warning. You don't have to obey it. Just listen. That alone begins to bring you back. Imagine yourself at your desk, surrounded by neat lists, each one a blueprint for a better life, carefully labeled, timed, and structured. The day begins with plans for the morning, the week mapped out, the future penciled in with calm precision. But the pages remain untouched, the list grows longer, while nothing truly begins. The ritual feels productive, but it quietly replaces action with the illusion of control. This behavior has always existed. In early Renaissance households, women recorded intricate household schedules that often went unfinished. In 18th century Russia, noblemen kept ledgers of improvement goals, noting every hour, but rarely lived by them. Even in modern times, the bullet journal, the app, the spreadsheet, they all offer a feeling of progress without the risks that real progress demands. Why do we do this? Because planning is safe. It allows the mind to imagine action without stepping into discomfort. Execution, by contrast, is vulnerable. It exposes us to failure, judgment, and fatigue. So we stay in the comfort of the theoretical, adjusting plans again and again while life quietly moves on. Imagine now the same desk, but this time, no lists, just the first task, small, unpolished, imperfect. And then the next. In doing, the world begins to shift. The need for perfection fades. The rhythm of motion returns. And slowly, the space between thought and life grows thinner. You wake up, eyes adjusting to the light, mind still fogged from sleep. And before you've fully arrived into the day, you've already made a decision. Skip breakfast. It feels harmless, maybe even efficient. But that small silence at the beginning of your day echoes further than you realize. In many cultures, the first meal isn't just a biological necessity. It's a signal, a declaration. The day has begun. In 19th century farming villages, the clatter of iron pans before sunrise meant life was already in motion. A slice of bread, a spoonful of porridge, warm milk, the rituals of readiness. Skipping that first act was rare, almost unthinkable. Not for health, but for rhythm. The body, like a well-worn path, relied on cues to know where it stood. Today, that path is more erratic. Alarms are snoozed, phones glow before breakfast, and nourishment, once instinctive, becomes negotiable. But the body remembers. Every missed morning reinforces an invisible message. Wait to be fed, wait to begin, wait to matter. Over time, the delay becomes habitual, not just in food, but in focus, in effort, in self-respect. It isn't about calories, it's about presence, about teaching your nervous system that you're worth prioritizing even before the world makes its demands. The spoonful of oats, the warm tea, the quiet chewing, these aren't just food. They're symbols of return, to routine, to intention, to yourself. Imagine waking into a day that's already racing ahead of you. The phone lights up with missed notifications. The kettle hisses while you try to remember if you replied to that email. The clothes you meant to iron remain crumpled. The day begins, not with thought, but with motion. For many, this is normal, even necessary. The rush gives a sense of progress, but beneath the surface, something else is happening. When your morning begins in chaos, You train your mind to enter a reactive state. Every choice becomes a response. There is no pause for intention, only a scramble to catch up. And over time, this becomes not just a habit, but a rhythm. You're not planning your life, you're surviving it. In older traditions, mornings were slower, tea brewed without distraction, floors were swept in silence, farmers walked the land before the labor began, not to hurry, but to see. Monks chanted, writers took ink to paper, not to finish anything, but to begin. The day was entered, not attacked. Now, the noise arrives before the sunlight. Science supports this shift. A reactive morning spikes cortisol, the stress hormone, and leaves you more distractible, less focused. You may finish many things, but few of them begin with you. You're answering, not initiating, reacting, not creating, and the loop repeats. But what if the first 10 minutes belonged to stillness? What if you didn't check the screen or the clock or the list, but simply breathed? Chaos waits patiently, but clarity must be chosen. Imagine yourself stepping out of sleep, not quite awake, not quite dreaming. The room is quiet, the light still pale, and your thoughts, those early, unguarded ones, begin to surface like mist from still water. And then, almost without noticing, it begins. A sigh, a mutter, a sharp thought about how little you slept, how much you have to do, how heavy the day already feels. Before your body even finds warmth and motion, your mind has been cast in shadow. This, too, is a kind of ritual. Long before coffee, before conversation, before the world truly meets you, there is a narrow passage, the moment between rest and intention. In earlier centuries, people filled this space with prayer, meditation, or silence. They spoke little in the morning. In monastic traditions, the first hour after waking was held sacred, shielded from complaint or judgment, as if one's first words carried extra weight in shaping the hours that followed. They believed that what you say before the sun fully rises lingers longer in the soul. But today, in kitchens cluttered with unopened bills and dishes from the night before, it's easy to let that first breath become a list of grievances. The weather, the workday, the ache in your back, the news. These thoughts feel small, harmless, even justified. Yet they set a tone, a neurological primer that teaches your brain to seek confirmation of its displeasure. Bit by bit, the day becomes what you named it at its beginning, a burden. Modern neuroscience has a name for this effect, negativity bias. It's the tendency to prioritize and cling to adverse experiences. And in the vulnerable first minutes of morning, this bias finds fertile ground. Like a single drop of ink spreading through clear water, one bitter thought can color everything. Now imagine rising in silence, the warmth of a cup in your hand, the rhythm of your breath, the hush before the world speaks back. No words yet, no verdicts passed, just you, choosing how to begin. Let the coffee come. But let your mind wake first, free of complaint, unanchored by yesterday. There's a peculiar weight that builds in silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that grows from unspoken words, words meant to be said days ago, but still waiting in the corners of your mind. You rehearse them in quiet moments, edit them in your head, imagine outcomes that never quite happen. And yet, when the moment comes, you stall. Again and again. Avoiding difficult conversations is a form of temporary relief, but it carries a cost. Each time you delay, the fear grows, not because the conversation gets harder, but because the unknown fills the space where clarity could live. Your imagination becomes the loudest voice in the room, whispering doubts, exaggerating consequences, crafting shadows that were never there. Meanwhile, the truth inside you waits, still clear, still steady, but growing heavier with time. Whether it's setting a boundary, asking a question, or expressing hurt, the longer you wait, the more your silence begins to echo louder than words ever could. And often, what we avoid is not the reaction of others, but the discomfort of being seen fully, vulnerable, unfiltered. But the conversations you put off are rarely as catastrophic as you fear. Most begin awkwardly, soften with honesty, and end with understanding, or at least with relief. The tension eases, the weight lifts, the moment passes, and you find yourself wondering why it took so long to speak. Your truth doesn't need perfection, just a voice. And sometimes, a quiet moment is the best place to begin. Imagine yourself waking slowly. The air is still cool, and the soft fabric of your sleepwear holds the warmth of sleep. There's no urgency, no need to change. You move to the kitchen, pour coffee, maybe scroll through a few messages. Hours pass, and without quite noticing, you're still wrapped in yesterday's softness. Comfortable, yes, but also strangely suspended. A quiet fog lingers. The hours feel diluted. Throughout history, clothing has shaped identity. In medieval guilds, a craftsman's apron signaled readiness. Roman senators wore togas to assume authority. Even the simple act of tying one's shoes, in many traditions, was a signal to the body that the day had begun. What we wear is not only for others, it is a message to ourselves. When you remain in sleepwear, that message is one of stillness. A whisper to the brain that effort can wait. It's not laziness exactly, it's more subtle. A soft resistance to momentum. The comfort, so gentle, makes action feel optional. Over time, the days blur. One blends into the next, and your environment, instead of nudging you forward, quietly lulls you back. Now imagine, just for a moment, pulling on a fresh shirt, a worn pair of jeans. Nothing formal, only different. The body adjusts, posture shifts, your breath lengthens. It's not magic, but it is a signal. The day has changed, and so have you. And sometimes, that small shift is enough to move gently from stillness into motion. You open your eyes, but the curtains stay drawn. The room remains dim, silent, wrapped in artificial shadow. You check your phone, shuffle into the day, but something feels misaligned, like your mind is still underwater. The clock says morning, but your body isn't convinced. For most of human history, light was law. The rise of the sun was the rise of life itself, marking when to wake, when to gather, when to move. In old Scandinavian villages, mothers would walk their children outside before breakfast, even in winter, just to feel the pale sky on their faces. Not for ritual, but survival. The body learned to begin when the earth did. Today, we insulate ourselves from that rhythm. We rise under LED bulbs, scroll through blue-lit screens, drink coffee in darkness. Morning becomes a suggestion, not a certainty. But the body doesn't forget the rules it was built on. It waits for sunlight, not just to see, but to reset. Melatonin eases, cortisol rises, cognition sharpens. One beam of real morning light can shift your biology into motion. Without it, days blur, focus dulls, sleep drifts later. You might blame stress or diet or distraction, but sometimes it's the missing signal your cells were hoping for. A biological whisper that never came. Imagine stepping outside, just for a minute. Eyes closed, breath slow. Letting the light touch your eyelids, even through the clouds. Not as a chore, but a return. To clarity, to rhythm. To the ancient understanding that the day does not begin when you want it to, but when light tells your body it's time. Imagine yourself seated at a desk, tabs open, messages blinking, hands moving between windows, documents, alerts. You are busy, but strangely, at the end of it, nothing feels done. Not really. This is the quiet illusion of multitasking. In modern life, we often confuse motion for momentum. The more you juggle, the more productive you feel, but the mind does not thrive in fragmentation. Each switch between tasks leaves behind a trace. Unfinished thoughts, interrupted logic. You spend more energy shifting gears than driving forward. Historically, even the most complex work unfolded in rhythm. A blacksmith shaped one tool at a time. A scribe inked one line before moving to the next. Progress was visible. physical. The rhythm was focused. Even when lives were harder, attention was whole. Today, you may find yourself answering an email mid-meeting while checking a delivery update. It feels efficient. But studies show the brain suffers under this illusion. Errors increase. Memory fades. And most importantly, the deeper, meaningful work, the kind that builds, shapes, and satisfies, remains untouched. You are busy, but are you present? The tasks may be small, responding, organizing, updating, but they consume the same attention that depth requires. Over time, a strange fatigue sets in, a weariness that doesn't come from work itself, but from never quite finishing. Imagine focusing on one thing, just one, the simplicity of starting and completing, the quiet satisfaction of attention fully given. Not everything demands urgency, but everything you choose deserves presence. Imagine yourself midway through the day, your body upright, your eyes open, but something feels off. Not wrong, exactly, just dull. Your thoughts feel wrapped in gauze. Your attention flickers like a candle losing air. You stretch your arms, shift in your seat, sigh with a tiredness that doesn't quite make sense. You might call it stress, or hunger, or the weight of the day, but often it's something far simpler, far quieter: dehydration. Long before we had digital clocks or reminders pinging from smartwatches, ancient civilizations structured entire routines around water. The Romans built aqueducts with near religious precision. Desert traders scheduled stops by ancient wells. In many traditions, water was not just a resource, it was a rhythm, a companion to the body's natural pulse. Today, we've replaced that rhythm with urgency, with caffeine, with forgetting. Mild dehydration doesn't arrive like a wave. It creeps in, silently. A 1 to 2% drop in hydration can already begin to impair memory, focus, and mood. The brain, made mostly of water, doesn't sound alarms. It simply slows. You become more irritable, more prone to misreading situations, more susceptible to anxiety that seems to arise from nowhere. The body, in its quiet language, is asking for something very old. And yet, in modern life, we learn to ignore thirst, to postpone it. We drink after meetings, after emails, after the feeling becomes loud enough to interrupt us. But by then, the damage is already underway, not dramatic, just cumulative. A slow sabotage of presence. Now imagine your day flowing differently. A glass of water first thing, before thoughts or screens. Small sips spaced not by thirst, but by care. Reconnecting not just with the body's needs, but with the idea that clarity is not always earned by effort, but sometimes by water. Simple, quiet water. You wake up, and the notifications are already waiting. Messages, updates, headlines, each one pulling at your attention like threads unraveling your focus. Before you've even stood up, you're already responding. To a world that moves faster than thought, louder than intention. A world that rewards urgency more than clarity. This is what it feels like to live in reaction mode, where your day isn't something you shape, but something that shapes you. Emails dictate your priorities. Algorithms curate your moods. Other people's needs, schedules, crises, these fill your hours before you've asked yourself what matters to you today. It's subtle at first. You tell yourself you're being efficient, responsive, connected. But slowly, your inner rhythm fades. Creativity needs space, vision requires quiet. And in a life filled only with reactions, there is no room left to design, only to adjust. You begin to lose the ability to pause, to begin something without an external prompt, to sit in stillness without reaching for a device. And in that constant motion, something essential is lost: your ability to listen to yourself. Imagine a day without interruptions. No dings, no pings, no scrolling, just the slow unfolding of your own thoughts. At first, it may feel like emptiness, but wait. Beneath the surface is something else: originality, direction, agency. Living reactively may keep you busy, but it rarely leaves you fulfilled. Because in the end, a meaningful life isn't built by answering every call. It's built by choosing which calls matter and when to finally answer your own. Imagine sitting across from someone speaking, softly, clearly. Their words reach you one by one, and you nod along. You're listening, or at least it feels like you are. But somewhere beneath the rhythm of their voice, your attention begins to loosen. A stray thought enters. A half-formed memory flickers. The voice continues, but something has already slipped past. And when the moment ends, you realize you heard everything, but remember almost nothing. This isn't new. In ancient Greece, orators trained students not only to speak, but to listen with presence, because even in quiet amphitheaters, minds wandered. Monks in medieval abbeys were taught to copy sermons by hand, not for reference, but to anchor their focus. Today, we often listen while doing something else, scrolling, cleaning, thinking ahead. Attention is fractured. Retention becomes rare. It's not a failure of intellect, it's a quiet drift. Passive attention feels like enough, but it leaves no imprint. Without conscious effort, wisdom simply floats by, ungrasped. The mind, so easily drawn inward, forgets that listening is not just hearing. It is holding, absorbing, sitting still enough for meaning to take root. Imagine now, the next time someone speaks, whether it's a voice in the room, a line from a book, or a thought from within, you lean gently closer, not urgently, but fully. And in that pause, where distraction might have crept in, something settles instead and stays. You're sitting with someone. The coffee is warm, the silence soft, but instead of resting in it, you reach for a story. Not yours, not theirs, but someone else's. A whispered mistake, a rumor passed along, a detail stretched thin just to fill the space. It feels harmless, even comforting, like tossing pebbles into a still pond just to see the ripples. But every time we speak about others instead of ourselves, we trade depth for distance. Conversation becomes a loop, not of ideas or dreams, but of speculation. And the silence we were trying to escape doesn't vanish. It just hides under noise. In quiet mountain villages of the past, elders spoke little during meals. Long silences were considered signs of presence, not discomfort. A shared stillness held more meaning than a dozen fragmented tales. Words were used with care. Stories were earned, not tossed like breadcrumbs. Today, silence feels like something to solve. We scroll, we speak, we stir the air with other people's lives. But the more we feed on gossip, the less we nourish ourselves. Our inner voice, curious, uncertain, honest, gets drowned beneath rehearsed opinions and third-hand truths. There's nothing wrong with stories. But the question is, whose story are you living in? When conversation becomes a mirror of others, we forget to check our own reflection. So next time you find yourself reaching for someone else's name just to keep the moment moving, pause. Let the silence breathe. It might feel awkward at first, but in that quiet, something deeper waits. Real thought, real presence, and maybe, finally, a story that's actually yours. Imagine your screen, layered in browser tabs, windows tucked behind windows, fragments of thought scattered across a glowing surface, an article half read, a form half filled, a playlist you meant to play, a message you meant to send. Everything open, nothing finished. It feels like possibility, but it's actually noise. Each tab is a small claim on your attention, a whisper at the edge of your focus. And though you aren't looking at them all, your mind holds their weight. You remember they exist. You remember you haven't returned. Digital clutter becomes mental clutter. In the early days of libraries, scholars studied by candlelight with a single open text. To read was to dwell, to sit inside a thought and wait for it to open. There were no pop-ups, no flickers, no hyperlinks pulling you sideways. There was space to sink in. Today, that space is crowded. Cognitive science calls it the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency to remember unfinished tasks more than completed ones. Every open tab is a mental loop left unresolved. a low hum of incompletion. And the more tabs you keep, the more your mind fragments. You think you're saving time, but often you're scattering it. You may tell yourself you'll come back, that you're just holding space for future attention. But the weight adds up, and in the quiet between actions, you feel it. That restless pull, that inability to be still. Close one, then another, and watch the mind follow. Imagine yourself at the edge of a full day. Meetings, messages, meals, checklists completed with mechanical precision. The hours move briskly, filled with tasks that make sense on paper, and yet, beneath the surface, something feels flattened, dimmed. You've done everything you were supposed to do, but it hasn't quite added up to meaning. There's a silence beneath the motion, a quiet ache you've trained yourself to ignore. It's the part of you that needed to create and wasn't fed. In earlier centuries, creativity wasn't confined to careers or side projects. A farmer carved patterns into wood. A mother hummed a song not heard before. A letter was written with care, not necessity. These weren't indulgences. They were how the inner life stayed alive in a world that asked for repetition. But today, creativity is often scheduled for later, for the weekend, for when the inbox is empty, for some imagined future version of yourself who has time. But the soul doesn't understand delay. It understands expression. And when you postpone it, something subtle begins to shrink, not with drama, but with slow erosion. You speak less vividly. You feel less connected. The world begins to look flatter, not because it is, but because you've stopped painting your part of it. Psychologists now speak of creative deprivation as a form of emotional fatigue, not boredom, not burnout, something more elusive. The mind loses a dimension, days blur, even joy feels muted, and yet the solution isn't loud. It doesn't require a masterpiece, a 10-minute sketch, a few lines in a journal, a melody hummed while folding laundry. These are not hobbies, they're lifelines. Now imagine returning to that space quietly, without performance. Let the world wait a moment. Let the need to create speak, not for praise or progress, but simply because it's how your soul breathes. And like breath, it mustn't be held too long. You finish the task, hit send, cross it off the list. But instead of satisfaction, there's only a shrug, a quiet dismissal that says, it wasn't that big a deal. You tell yourself it was easy, expected, nothing worth celebrating. And so, the moment passes unnoticed. Again. This is how small successes disappear, not with failure, but with silence. The kind of silence that trains your brain to ignore progress. Over time, it stops looking for milestones and starts waiting only for what's missing. The unfinished, the not yet done, the better you could have been. But the mind doesn't run on logic alone. It runs on memory and feeling. When you deny yourself the feeling of accomplishment, no matter how small, you rob your system of reinforcement, like watering a plant but withholding the sunlight. The roots remain, but growth begins to stall. You might think humility is the reason, that keeping your head down is noble, that celebrating small things is childish. But there's a difference between humility and neglect. One is grounded, the other slowly erases your sense of worth. Think back to the last time you acknowledged something you did well, without qualification, without brushing it aside. It might be harder than expected, because the world often tells us that only the big wins count. But life is mostly built from the small ones. Answering the email you were dreading, choosing rest instead of burnout, speaking kindly when it would have been easier not to. These are moments of alignment, moments when your actions reflected your values. That is success, whether or not anyone applauds. To remember how to feel achievement is not indulgent, it's necessary. It's how your mind learns to keep going, to feel progress, to trust your own effort, not for praise, not for perfection, just to remind yourself that you're still growing. Imagine yourself in a quiet room after a long day. You haven't lifted anything heavy, yet your body feels tired. Your thoughts are scattered. There's a dull ache, not physical, but somewhere beneath the surface. And when you trace it back, you realize It began with a conversation. A voice that spoke too much, but said too little. A presence that left you smaller than you were before. Throughout history, people have spoken of energy, not as electricity, but as a life force felt between souls. In ancient China, the draining of qi was treated with the same seriousness as physical illness. In old Celtic myths, some were said to steal your strength with mere proximity. Today, we explain it with psychology, emotional labor, boundary erosion, empathic fatigue, different terms for the same quiet leak. When you tolerate the same patterns day after day, criticism disguised as concern, guilt disguised as care, you teach your nervous system that depletion is normal, that peace must be earned through endurance. But that is a false contract. No growth demands your exhaustion. No connection should cost you clarity. Imagine, then, the gentle act of stepping back, not in anger, but in self-preservation. A pause, a limit, a closed door that does not slam, but clicks softly into place. In that stillness, something strange happens. You begin to refill, and slowly, the weight that was never yours begins to fall away. You open a video. A voice tells you to rise, to conquer, to push through. You nod, maybe feel a chill down your spine. Then you scroll to the next one. Another voice, another quote, another clip of someone running before dawn or building something great. You feel inspired, almost. But still, you remain where you are. There is a strange comfort in borrowed ambition, a quiet satisfaction in watching others overcome. It feels like movement, but it isn't. It's a simulation of action, like watching waves crash and calling it swimming. In older times, before screens and slogans, motivation wasn't something consumed. It was something summoned. A farmer rose, not because of a morning mantra, but because the soil waited. The task was real, the day indifferent. There were no cinematic speeches, only a quiet resolve built on repetition. Today, we binge motivation the way others binge distraction. Clip after clip, reel after reel. Each one gives a little jolt of imagined progress. But without motion, that inspiration has nowhere to go. It pools. It stagnates. The truth is, you don't need more words. You need fewer reasons to wait. The fire you're looking for won't come from someone else's voice echoing in your headphones. It starts with one unremarkable act, a decision made without drama, a step taken without applause. Imagine watching one less video tomorrow, closing the tab before the next speech, and instead standing up, doing one thing, not to change your life, but to claim it. Because real change doesn't feel like a climax. It feels like a quiet beginning you don't rewind. Imagine you're working, or reading, or simply sitting with your thoughts. And then, ping. A flash of light, a vibration, a subtle sound, just enough to tilt your attention off balance. You glance, maybe respond, maybe not. But something has already shifted. That moment, barely a second, fractures focus. Notifications were designed for urgency, but now they arrive for everything. A like, a sale, a reminder for something you never asked to be reminded of. And with every ping, your attention splinters. The mind, once flowing in a single direction, is pulled sideways, again and again. Long ago, silence was default. A craftsman worked by sound and feel. A letter arrived after days, not seconds. Thought had time to deepen. There was space between signal and response. But now, the gap is gone. The moment the phone buzzes, so does the mind. Science calls this attention residue, the trace of whatever you just switched from. Even when you try to return to your task, a part of your mind lingers behind. Focus becomes fragmented. Completion becomes rare. And still, the notifications come. You may think you're in control, that you'll only check once. But attention, once broken, doesn't mend instantly. You begin to live in a state of quiet interruption, never fully immersed, never fully absent. always on the edge of the next distraction. Try this. Turn one notification off, then another, and watch what returns to you when the noise finally fades. Imagine yourself sitting still for hours, your posture slowly collapsing into the shape of your chair, your breath shallow, your spine curved like a question left unanswered. The tasks get done, the mind races ahead, but the body remains behind, silent, forgotten. At first, you don't notice. Then, one day, you rise and feel unfamiliar aches, or more quietly still, a heaviness, not in the limbs, but in motivation itself. A slow erosion of drive, not fatigue, but friction. For most of human history, movement wasn't optional. It was survival. A fire to build, a hill to climb, a path to walk again and again. Physical motion wasn't separated from thought or mood. It was their companion. In ancient Greek schools, philosophers walked as they spoke. Plato, Aristotle, all pacing through ideas. In monasteries, monks moved in rhythmic rituals. Even artists, musicians, scholars, they understood that the body's stillness too long could dull the mind's flame. But modern life favors the static, the seated, the screen-focused. We measure productivity by stillness, by hours planted in front of a machine. And gradually, that stillness becomes the new normal. Not restful, but restless. Not calm, but compressed. The body stores it all: stress, tension, inertia, waiting for a release that never comes. When movement is skipped, so is renewal. Blood slows, thoughts fog, emotions tighten. Resilience begins in the muscles. Not just physical resilience, but emotional elasticity. The ability to bounce back, to adapt, to feel capable again. Without movement, even simple challenges feel larger. Goals seem heavier. The will to act begins to rust. Now imagine beginning differently. A quiet stretch before the morning begins. A walk around the block when your thoughts won't settle. Not for fitness, not for a goal, but because your body is not a container for your mind, it is part of the mind. And when it moves, something opens. Energy, clarity, drive. They don't return all at once, but they do return. In motion, softly, steadily. There's a comfort in speaking. In filling silence with words, explaining, responding, offering your thoughts before the pause can grow too long. It feels active, productive, like progress. But sometimes, the need to speak becomes a shield, one that blocks you from receiving what was never loud to begin with. When we talk more than we listen, we hear less than we need, not just from others, but from ourselves. In every conversation, there are things said and unsaid, ideas wrapped in hesitation, emotions too soft to survive interruption. But if your voice is always in the foreground, nothing else gets a chance to unfold. It's not always ego. Sometimes it's fear. The fear that silence will be mistaken for ignorance. That listening means surrendering control. That if we don't speak first, we'll be forgotten. So, we overcompensate, filling every gap with explanation, advice, stories, hoping that more words will somehow create more connection. But growth doesn't come from what we already know. It comes from what surprises us, what challenges our rhythm. And often, the most transformative things arrive quietly, hidden in another person's hesitation, or in the long pause that follows a difficult truth. Imagine, for a moment, being in a conversation where your only task is to notice, not to fix, reply, or add, just to be present without preparing your next sentence. It's in that stillness that true understanding begins. Listening is not the absence of speech, it's the presence of attention, a kind of humility, a kind of strength. Because to truly listen is to admit there are things still worth learning, and that sometimes silence holds more wisdom than we expect. Imagine a quiet moment, interrupted by a request. It's small, maybe even kind. A favor, a plan, a task. Before you've even weighed it, your lips shape the word yes. It's reflexive, automatic. You mean well, of course you do. But as the day unfolds, you feel it. The edges of your time fray. The hours no longer belong to you. In many cultures, especially those rooted in hospitality or hierarchy, agreement was once survival. To say yes meant belonging, deference, safety. And even now, centuries later, some part of that lingers. You say yes to avoid conflict, to be liked, to seem generous, useful, strong. But each unmeasured yes is a quiet erosion of intention, of space, of self. The cost isn't always immediate. At first, it's just a rearranged hour, then a delay in something personal, then guilt for not doing it better, faster, more joyfully. Eventually, the calendar fills, but your heart does not. Priorities blur. The day becomes scattered, and all the while, beneath the smile, a quiet resentment brews. Now imagine the pause before yes. Just a breath, a gentle check-in. Is this aligned? Is this yours to hold? Sometimes the answer is still yes, but it's rooted, clear, voluntary. And other times, the no that follows is not rejection, but preservation. A boundary that makes space for the things that truly matter, and for the version of you that knows how to choose. You don't notice it at first. A small impulse, a snack you didn't plan, a subscription you forgot to cancel, rounding up for delivery, tapping without thinking. Just a few coins, you tell yourself, not enough to matter, but over time, the habit forms, not on your bank statement, but in your mind. Each unnoticed expense quietly rewires your relationship with value. Spending becomes reflex. The act loses weight. And slowly, you begin to teach yourself that small waste is acceptable, that unconscious decisions are harmless, but they're not. They're practice. In old merchant towns, even a single misplaced coin had meaning. Shopkeepers would weigh currency with care, knowing margins were thin, and small leaks could sink entire ledgers. They understood that wealth was not built in windfalls, but in vigilance, repeated daily restraint that added up over seasons. Today, our transactions are invisible. One tap replaces intention. But the psychology hasn't changed. What you normalize becomes who you are. And when you ignore the micro decisions, you build a tolerance for decay, not just in money, but in discipline, clarity, and direction. It's not about obsession, it's about awareness. Imagine noticing the impulse instead of obeying it, questioning the pattern before it becomes part of you. Because every unnoticed transaction is more than just a number, it's a message you send yourself. One that says, I am not watching, but you can change that. Not with budgets and spreadsheets, but with small acts of attention, with pauses, with choices made fully awake. And that, over time, is what builds real wealth, not just in your wallet, but in your sense of self. Imagine walking through a house where every drawer is slightly open, every light half dimmed, every sentence on the wall trailing off before the end. This is what your mind feels like when tasks remain unfinished, scattered moments without closure. Each one hums quietly beneath the surface. A bill left unpaid, a message unsent, a corner of the room still waiting to be cleaned. Small things, often invisible to others. But to your mind, they remain loud, persistent, incomplete. Psychologists call them open loops, tasks you've started or committed to but haven't completed. And while they may seem harmless, they carry weight. Your brain tracks them, even in the background. You may forget the details, but you don't forget the pull, the feeling of something undone. In earlier times, tasks often had natural endings. A field was harvested and the season passed. A fire was lit, then extinguished. But in modern life, loops rarely close on their own. Emails pile up, projects stretch into weeks, promises to yourself get delayed into the indefinite. There is no moment of completion, only delay. And each delay whispers a soft accusation. You still haven't. The effect is subtle, but cumulative. Focus thins. Self-trust erodes. You feel busy, but unaccomplished. tired, but not at peace, dasati. As if you're always behind something you can't name. Try closing one loop today, just one, not for productivity, but for relief. The mind was never meant to carry so much unfinished. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of intention. The idea is there, clear, alive, a change you want to make, a habit you wish to build, a project waiting to begin. You feel it rise like a quiet current. And then, softly, almost kindly, a voice within offers a compromise. Not now, tomorrow, when the timing is better, when you're more rested, when the circumstances feel just right. You nod. You agree. The pressure lifts, and in that small relief, a pattern is born. This phrase, "I'll start tomorrow," has ancient roots. Even in the Stoic writings of Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, you'll find warnings about delay. The Greeks had a word for it, akrasia, the state of acting against your better judgment, a kind of internal rebellion that doesn't feel violent, it feels reasonable. But time, indifferent to reasoning, moves on. And tomorrow rarely arrives as expected. Modern behavioral science now shows that each time you delay a goal, the brain receives a small reward. Relief from effort. Escape from risk. You feel momentarily safe, but in the background, the brain learns. It begins to associate comfort with avoidance. The more you delay, the more familiar that delay becomes. Procrastination doesn't just waste time, it rewires belief. It erodes your sense of follow-through. Each "not today" becomes a vote for a self who doesn't act. And yet, beginnings are always small. No matter how grand the vision, it starts with a step that feels almost too ordinary. A first page, a short workout, a few lines of code. The secret is not in waiting for readiness, but in starting despite its absence. Readiness, after all, is often a side effect of motion, not a prerequisite. Now imagine beginning now, not perfectly, not loudly, just now. Even if it's just a whisper of action. The reward isn't just in what you complete, it's in proving to yourself that you are someone who begins. Not someday, not soon, but now. You post the photo, you wait. A like, a comment, a response. It feels good, briefly. A flicker of approval, as if someone handed you a small mirror and said, "Yes, this is who you are." But the mirror doesn't last, because soon you need another, then another. And eventually, your reflection depends on how others choose to see you. When you constantly seek external validation, your sense of self becomes fragile, tied to shifting moods, distracted attention, and unspoken expectations. What was once an inner knowing begins to splinter, cracked by the pressure to be seen a certain way. You become a version of yourself edited by other people's opinions. It doesn't begin with insecurity. Often, it starts with a genuine desire to connect, to be understood, to be affirmed. But slowly, validation becomes currency. You trade pieces of authenticity for approval, softening your edges just enough to fit the shape of someone else's comfort. And the more you rely on this, the more anxious you become. You read between lines that aren't there. You chase compliments, dread silence, interpret neutrality as rejection. You stop asking yourself, "What do I think of this?" and start wondering, "What will they think of me?" Imagine what it would feel like to step outside that cycle, to let your sense of worth be shaped not by reaction, but by reflection, not by applause, but by alignment. Validation isn't wrong, but when it becomes the foundation, it can't hold the weight of who you truly are. Your identity is not a consensus. It's a quiet knowing, one that strengthens every time you trust your own voice before seeking another. Imagine yourself alone, deep into the night. The world outside has gone still. The lights are low. The clock glows faintly. You're not working, not resting, not dreaming, just lingering in a kind of pause, scrolling, wandering, waiting, though you're not sure for what. The hours stretch thin, and even though you're tired, you stay. Across centuries, night once belonged to rest. Oil lamps were precious. Sleep came early. But in time, We reclaimed the darkness, first with fire, then with screens. We called it freedom, to stretch the day, to steal back moments, and sometimes it is. But when the late hours hold no purpose, no joy, no meaning, they become something else, a quiet sabotage. The body keeps count, even when the mind forgets. Sleep lost is not just rest denied, it's clarity dimmed, patience thinned, resilience reduced. You wake into a day already weakened, and what's more, it repeats. Night after night, the mind resists sleep not out of necessity, but habit, as if fatigue deserves punishment, as if stillness must be filled. Now imagine a different night, the same room, the same stillness. But this time, you pause with intent. You close the screen, you turn off the light, not because you must, but because you choose. In that act, tomorrow begins to form, not as a burden, but as a quiet offering. And in honoring rest, you reclaim not just sleep, but the self who rises from it. You replay it again, the words they said, the way they looked at you, the silence that followed. It surfaces without warning, on a quiet walk, in the middle of a task, just before sleep. You tell yourself you've let it go, but it lingers, like a splinter beneath the skin, small but persistent. Grudges don't shout, they whisper, not loud enough to interrupt your day, but just loud enough to color it. A bitterness that coats joy, dulls laughter, drains moments before they fully bloom. And yet, we hold on to them, as if they're proof, as if carrying the weight makes us right. In ancient Japan, samurai were taught to resolve conflict quickly, not just for honor, but for clarity. A warrior clouded by resentment was seen as unfit, not because of emotion, but because grudges fogged judgment. They blurred the now with ghosts of then. We think holding on gives us control, that our anger protects us, but often it's the opposite. The person we resent moves on. They live, laugh, forget, while we stay behind, locked in a story that stopped serving us long ago. Forgiveness isn't a gift to them. It's a return to yourself, not approval, not forgetting, just freedom from the constant loop, a chance to breathe without bitterness, to feel joy without its shadow. Imagine setting it down, not with ceremony, not with dramatic closure, just quietly, choosing to stop sipping the poison, even if they never say sorry, even if they never understand, because healing doesn't wait for permission. And peace is a decision you don't have to explain to anyone but yourself. Imagine standing at the edge of two paths. One is winding, uneven, quiet, unfamiliar. The other is smooth, direct, marked with signs promising speed. Your hand moves almost without thought toward the shortcut. After all, why not make things easier? But ease isn't always the same as strength. Each time you bypass the long route, you skip more than just time. You skip the struggle, yes, but also the shaping, the slow build of patience, the quiet training of resilience. Shortcuts promise results, but rarely offer depth. Think of the ancient apprentice. Whether sculptor, tailor, or scribe, learning was repetition, painstaking, a slow layering of skill into muscle and memory. The process wasn't optional, it was the lesson itself. To rush it meant to miss it. Today, tools are faster. Templates exist. AI writes. Routes are pre-mapped. And yet, when the system falters, when the shortcut fails, many find they've skipped the part where real understanding lives. Without the long way, there's no weight behind the action, no roots beneath the confidence. Shortcuts are not wrong, they have their place, but when taken always, they leave something behind, an unfinished capacity, a shallow strength, and so the long way waits, not as punishment, but as invitation. Walk it sometimes. Feel the slow pull of your own effort. Notice how your footing grows sure, how your pace deepens, how your mind learns not just where to go, but how to stand steady once you arrive. Imagine yourself hearing a sentence, seeing a gesture, or reading a headline, and within seconds the verdict forms. A mental label clicks into place: right, wrong, foolish, strange. It feels decisive, certain, efficient. But beneath that speed is something else, a narrowing. Like closing a door you didn't even realize you passed. Snap judgments feel like clarity, but often they are distance in disguise. For most of human history, quick judgment had a purpose. In the wild, it meant survival, friend or foe, danger or safety. But those instincts were never meant to govern conversations, beliefs, or the slow, winding terrain of human complexity. In ancient Zen traditions, the student was taught to observe without naming, to watch thoughts arise without becoming them. Not because judgment is wrong, but because premature judgment is blinding. Modern psychology has a name for this reflex: the fundamental attribution error, our tendency to reduce others to character flaws while excusing ourselves with context. If someone is late, they're careless. If you are late, it was traffic. This bias narrows not just your perception of others, but your capacity for empathy, for learning, for transformation. It trades the richness of inquiry for the convenience of assumption. But every person, idea, and moment contains more than what's visible at first glance. A quiet hesitation might be grief. A sharp tone might hide fear. A belief you reject could be rooted in a truth you've never had to live through. Judgment, when made too soon, traps you in shallow waters, safe, familiar, but stagnant. Understanding, on the other hand, requires wading deeper, sitting with discomfort, asking instead of answering. Now imagine pausing before the verdict, breathing before the label, letting the unknown be what it is, a space to enter, not control. Depth is not granted to the quick, but to the quiet, to those who wait, watch, and ask again. You reach for the screen without thinking. Just a few minutes, you tell yourself. A quick scroll, one more episode, background noise to fill the silence. Hours pass like vapor. You're not unhappy, just dulled. Content washes over you, scene after scene, never asking much, never offering much in return. This is the nature of passive media. It doesn't challenge, it doesn't demand. It comforts without nourishing. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, it reshapes your attention. Beauty starts to feel less vibrant. Silence becomes uncomfortable. Complexity feels like too much work. You begin to crave stimulation, not meaning, movement, not depth. And without realizing it, your mind adapts, shortening its focus, flattening its curiosity. The slow wonders of reality, sunlight on a wall, the quiet bloom of a thought, get overshadowed by faster, louder things. It's not that entertainment is the problem. Storytelling is ancient. Laughter is medicine. But when your relationship with media becomes entirely passive, when it replaces reflection, solitude, or genuine presence, it begins to blur something important. Ask yourself, when was the last time you sat with something difficult and didn't reach for distraction? When did you last let boredom ripen into creativity or discomfort into insight? These states aren't obstacles, they're doorways, but they close quietly when drowned in noise. Mindless consumption doesn't make you feel less, it trains you to feel less, to skip over subtlety, to forget what moved you before the algorithm decided what should. You don't need to reject media. You only need to return to it awake, to notice, to choose, to let your mind stretch again, not just be filled. Imagine a small discomfort, a flutter in the chest, a dull ache, a sudden fatigue that doesn't pass. It's quiet, almost ignorable. Life moves quickly, and you tell yourself it's nothing, maybe dehydration, maybe stress. The thought drifts away. The body speaks again, a little louder this time, but you're busy, distracted, committed to staying strong. You learn to tune it out. For centuries, people treated illness as something external: spirits, humors, imbalance. But long before the symptoms became visible, the body whispered its warnings. In traditional healing practices, even small sensations were seen as early messengers. Today, science agrees. Most conditions begin subtly: a shift in rhythm, a pattern slightly off. But in a world that glorifies endurance, we often wait until the whisper becomes a shout. There's a strange pride in ignoring pain, in pushing through, but unacknowledged signals don't vanish. They wait, they accumulate, and often, by the time we respond, the damage has deepened. What could have been a pause becomes a crisis. What could have been gentle attention now requires intervention. Now imagine yourself listening, early, softly, not in fear, but in care. A glass of water, a checkup, a full night's sleep. These are small acts, but powerful ones. To respond to the body's voice is not weakness, it is wisdom. And in listening early, you protect the life still waiting to unfold. The day ends. Lights dim, tasks blur, the hum of activity fades. You lie down, scroll a little, then let sleep take you. No pause, no glance back, just a quiet exit from hours already forgotten. But in skipping that final look, you miss something vital. Not the events, but the meaning inside them. Every day speaks to you, in small stumbles, in fleeting wins, in repeated thoughts you didn't notice repeating. Reviewing your day isn't about judgment, it's about seeing, truly seeing the patterns you live by without knowing. In ancient monastic traditions, evening reflection was sacred. Monks would sit in silence, eyes closed, and trace their day backward. Not to dwell, but to understand. They believed that even the smallest emotion held a lesson, if seen without pride or shame. Today, we move fast. We measure success by completion, not clarity. But when you don't review your day, you forfeit the map it quietly drew. The moment you got distracted again, the words you regret not saying, the task you avoided for the third time this week. These aren't failures, they're signs, signals, invitations to change. Without reflection, days blur, habits hide. You keep tripping on the same stones without knowing where they lie. But with just a few moments of honest pause, a fog lifts. Patterns emerge. You begin to see not just what you did, but why. So tonight, before sleep, close your eyes. Walk gently through the hours, not with blame, not with praise, just awareness. Because in the quiet replay of your own life, you'll find what you've been missing, yourself, watching, learning, ready to begin again. Imagine writing a letter, sealing the envelope, but never sending it. The task felt complete in your hands, yet something vital was left undone. That's how your mind registers work abandoned just before the finish. 90% complete is still unfinished. Your subconscious does not reward partial closure. It doesn't see the effort, only the gap that remains. The task continues to echo quietly, a dull thread of tension you can't quite name. You move on, but it stays. Not loudly, but persistently. This is the burden of almost done. In traditional crafts, an object wasn't finished until it passed through every hand. Clay was not a pot until it left the kiln. A wall was not a home until it was swept. These thresholds mattered, not just for completion, but for rest. To finish was to release. Now, many of our tasks end in limbo. A report with one paragraph left, a gift bought but never wrapped, a book nearly read. You tell yourself you'll return, but days pass, and so does your momentum. And in the background, the unfinished weighs more than it should. Your mind counts incompletion as failure, not in judgment, but in tension. It cannot close the loop. It cannot let go. But finishing, truly finishing, brings relief far beyond the task itself. It rebuilds trust in your own follow-through. It tells the brain, this is done. This can rest. Find one nearly finished thing today. Complete it. Not for productivity, but for peace. Imagine yourself scrolling through a glowing screen late at night. Someone else's life unfolds in curated fragments, celebrations, milestones, clarity, a book launch, a wedding, a dream home. You pause, not out of envy, but out of quiet self-interrogation. Am I behind? The question settles in your chest like mist. You close the app, but the feeling lingers. You've measured yourself, but with someone else's ruler. In older times, comparisons were constrained by proximity. You compared yourself to your neighbors, your village, your circle. Lives unfolded side by side, slowly, visibly. But now, through glass and algorithms, you're constantly exposed to other people's highlights, broadcast without context. Their chapter 20, seen in crisp resolution, flickers against your own messy draft, your rewrites, your hesitations, your unfinished lines. Ancient philosophers warned against this temptation. The Stoics, especially Epictetus, taught that comparison was the thief of inner peace, not because ambition is harmful, but because misplaced metrics are. Success, when measured externally, becomes distorted. You see the fruit, not the soil, the applause, not the silent mornings of effort, and worse, you begin to devalue your own journey, not for what it lacks, but for what it isn't. Modern studies confirm this distortion. Psychologists call it upward social comparison, and it's linked to diminished well-being, reduced motivation, and chronic dissatisfaction. The more you compare, the more you discount progress that doesn't glitter. Quiet growth, emotional resilience, choosing healing over hustle. These don't photograph well, but they shape a life far more meaningfully. Now imagine reading your life on its own terms, turning the page without glancing at another book, celebrating the paragraph you just rewrote, the sentence you finally found the courage to change. Chapter 20 will come, but it won't look like anyone else's, and it was never meant to. You don't act on it, you don't say the words out loud, but in quiet moments, when you're driving, walking, lying in bed, your mind drifts back to them. The person who hurt you, the words you'd say if given the chance, the perfect moment of payback that would balance the scale. It feels private, even harmless. Just a thought, a release valve. But revenge, even in the mind, carries weight. The more often you imagine it, the more it becomes part of how your mind orients itself. Slowly, subtly, negativity becomes familiar, comfortable, a quiet lens through which everything is measured. You begin to notice slights more quickly, interpret silence as judgment, see competition where there is none. Because the brain doesn't always separate fantasy from function, it builds habits from repetition. And thoughts repeated often enough become a compass, pointing you not toward healing, but toward bitterness. There's a difference between remembering pain and rehearsing harm. One keeps you honest, the other keeps you stuck. Seeking mental revenge doesn't bring closure. It only tightens the thread that connects you to the past you're trying to escape. Imagine instead a mind not occupied by reaction, but reclaimed by presence. Not naive, not forgetful, but free. Free to choose where attention goes. Free to spend energy building rather than calculating. Not because they deserved forgiveness, but because you deserve peace. In the end, the one who hurt you may never know how often they visit your thoughts, but you will. And every time they do, ask gently, what part of you is still waiting to be released? Imagine a moment of stillness, then a vibration, a message, an update. Someone is doing something, traveling, celebrating, achieving. You weren't invited, or maybe you were, but hesitated. Suddenly, the quiet of your own day feels smaller, incomplete. A flicker of restlessness grows, not because you truly wanted to be there, but because you weren't. That is the shape of FOMO, the fear of missing out. Throughout history, we've looked to others to understand what's valuable. In ancient Rome, public appearances were everything. Missing a gathering meant risking status. In 18th century salons, even poets wrote what they thought the crowd wanted to hear. Today, the crowd never sleeps. It lives in your pocket, whispering constantly that somewhere, something better is happening without you. And so you chase. You say yes when you meant no. You follow paths that aren't yours, attend events that don't fill you, commit to things that drain more than they give. You gather moments, but feel strangely hollow, because none of it was rooted in your own longing, only in avoidance. Avoiding the feeling of being left out, of not being enough. Now imagine saying no, not out of withdrawal, but out of clarity. You stay home, not because you missed the invitation, but because your own life is enough tonight. That stillness, once uncomfortable, becomes a choice. And in that space, the life you want has room to return. You reach for your phone, not because there's something urgent, just a flicker of stillness you don't want to feel, a pause too quiet, a moment too empty. So you scroll, swipe, refresh. Noise returns, and with it, relief. But something else quietly slips away. Boredom, though uncomfortable, is not your enemy. It is a door, a threshold, a clearing in the forest of distraction where new thoughts can finally arrive. When you constantly run from it, you never see what was trying to catch up to you. In ancient desert monasteries, silence was treated as a companion. Monks sat for hours, staring at stone, breathing dust. Not out of punishment, but practice. They believed the mind, when stripped of stimulation, revealed its deeper layers. That boredom was not a void, but a mirror. Today, we fill every gap. Waiting rooms, checkout lines, red lights, always another tap, another scroll. Our minds grow crowded, but shallow. We mistake activity for awareness and wonder why clarity never comes. But creativity doesn't grow in noise. Insight doesn't bloom on demand. It needs space, stillness, a lull long enough for the deeper currents to rise. The best ideas, the strangest truths, the quietest breakthroughs, they don't shout over your distractions. They wait until you've run out of noise, so the next time boredom creeps in, try staying. Just a little longer. Don't run. Don't fill. Let the quiet expand. Let the mind stretch beyond the usual loops. There, in that awkward stillness, something unexpected waits. Not emptiness, but discovery. Imagine sitting down with a plate of food, fork in hand, but eyes on a screen. News scrolls, messages ping, a video plays softly in the background. The food disappears, bite by bite, but you barely taste it. You're full, but not satisfied. Fed, but still unsettled. This is not just eating. It's absorbing noise. When you eat while distracted, you take in more than calories. You consume the pace of the screen, the tension of headlines, the chaos of your surroundings. The meal becomes a transaction. Fuel in, sensation muted. The act loses its shape. In older times, meals were grounding rituals. People gathered. Prayers were whispered. Bread was passed by hand. Even when simple, food had presence. It marked the middle of the day, the closing of work, the beginning of rest. Eating meant pausing. Now, it means multitasking. Science shows that distracted eating increases intake because the brain doesn't register fullness until much later. But beyond that, it erodes awareness. You forget how something tasted. You forget how much you had. And over time, you forget what it means to be nourished, not just fed. The body is wise, but only if you let it speak. Try one quiet meal, just one. No screen, no scrolling, no urgency. Let each bite be a moment. Let the act of eating be enough, because what you consume with your body, you carry in your mind. Imagine yourself in a quiet room with another person. The conversation flows, words spoken, responses given, but something remains missing. You glance away, focus on your hands, the window, the floor. You listen, but you don't look. And in that simple act, avoiding the gaze, you slip out of a deeper exchange, not of facts, but of presence. The conversation may continue, but the connection stalls. For centuries, eye contact has carried meaning beyond language. In ancient societies, to meet someone's eyes was a mark of respect, honesty, or even challenge. Across cultures, from Egyptian tomb paintings to Renaissance portraits, eyes have been called the mirror of the soul, the place where truth might flicker, even when lips lie. And yet today, many of us spend our lives looking away, toward screens, toward distractions, toward anywhere but into another's gaze. Avoiding eye contact is not always intentional. It can stem from shyness, habit, fatigue. But its cost is subtle and cumulative. Without it, the brain registers disconnection. Studies in social neuroscience show that eye contact activates areas associated with empathy, social bonding, and trust. When we avoid it, we weaken the signals that say, I see you, I'm here, I'm real. Over time, our own sense of presence begins to thin, not just how others see us, but how we feel ourselves to be. Children learn language by watching eyes. Infants track meaning through gaze before they know words. And adults, even when silent, read emotions in microglances, the tiny contractions of muscle around the eyes. When you consistently look away, you miss this language. You miss the moment when someone softens, hesitates, opens. And they, in turn, miss the moment when you might have truly met them. Now imagine staying. Just a few seconds longer, not staring, not forcing, just allowing your gaze to remain. It's not confrontation, it's recognition. A silent gesture that says, I am here with you. And in that shared silence, something stronger than words can finally be heard. You tell yourself you'll remember the date, the errand, the email, the passing thought. No need to write it down. It'll stay in your head. And so it does, not just one thing, but many. Tasks, worries, fragments of unfinished conversations. A mental list that loops behind your every action, humming with quiet urgency. It's easy to mistake this for productivity. You feel alert, engaged, responsible. But beneath that surface is tension, small, persistent, unspoken. Because when your brain becomes your storage system, it never fully rests. It hovers, scanning, checking, trying not to drop anything. The mind is brilliant at connecting ideas, but it's not built to carry everything at once. That's why stress doesn't always come from doing too much. It comes from holding too much. Even when you're still, your thoughts race. Not because you're unorganized, but because your mind is trying to be both the creator and the container. You may notice it in your sleep, light, broken, filled with sudden reminders. Or in your attention, scattered, impatient, flickering from one task to the next. You might think you're just busy, but in truth, your mind is sounding an alarm, not loud, but constant. Imagine emptying just a little of that weight, writing a list, speaking a worry out loud, letting your environment hold some of what your memory no longer needs to guard. The relief isn't dramatic, but it's real. The breath feels deeper. The pause feels safer. The mind stops sprinting. Productivity doesn't live in the chaos of remembering everything. It lives in the calm that follows release. You don't need to carry it all to prove you're capable. You just need to carry what matters and let the rest wait somewhere outside of you. Imagine walking through a room where every surface holds something. Papers stacked, clothes draped, small forgotten objects tucked into corners. You know where most things are, or at least you think you do. But each time your eyes scan the space, a quiet weight settles on your chest. It's not chaos exactly. It's something softer, slower, a fog. In ancient Japanese homes, emptiness was intentional. Space itself was part of the design, allowing energy to breathe and thoughts to settle. In contrast, modern life often overflows. More items, more tools, more options, until the walls begin to close in. What was once just physical becomes psychological. Decisions feel heavier. Focus frays. Rest never fully arrives. Clutter, in this way, becomes more than mess. It's a map of what hasn't been resolved. Unread books whisper of forgotten ambitions. Unfolded laundry holds the rhythm of days you tried to outrun. Old belongings anchor you to versions of yourself you no longer are, but haven't let go of. And over time, the room reflects the mind, scattered, delayed, burdened by what was never processed. Now imagine clearing just one corner, a drawer, a shelf, not out of obligation, but as an invitation. With each object released, space returns, not just around you, but within. And in that space, the mind exhales. Slowly, clarity begins to take shape. not in perfection, but in presence. There are questions you think about briefly, then quietly set aside. Am I happy? Why do I keep doing this? What am I afraid of losing? They surface in still moments, then dissolve beneath tasks, screens, or laughter that comes too quickly. You call it busy. You call it tired. But often, it's avoidance. The mind has a strange way of protecting itself. It wraps the hardest questions in fog, not to erase them, but to delay them, to keep you comfortable, just enough to function. But unasked questions don't disappear. They settle, deep beneath your routines, shaping your choices, your moods, your fears, without your permission. In old philosophical schools, students weren't given answers. They were given questions, and told to live with them, to let the discomfort stretch across days, even years, because they understood that unanswered questions don't weaken you, unfaced ones do. Today, we rush to fix, to move, to decide. But reflection isn't always resolution. Sometimes, it's simply sitting with what unsettles you. Asking what part of your life is built on silence. What part of your identity is protecting something you're too afraid to ask. You don't need to solve everything, but you do need to stop running. Let the question stand. Let it echo. Write it down. Whisper it. Let it hurt a little. Because the things you avoid don't stay quiet forever. They become the monsters that steer your life from beneath the surface. And only by facing them, slowly and honestly, do you reclaim the map and the pen. Imagine the first moments after waking, the world still hushed, the light not yet sharp. These moments could be a beginning, a slow unfolding, but instead, they vanish, replaced by the hurried brush of teeth, the clatter of dishes, a mind already 5 steps ahead of the body. When you rush the morning, you erase the frame of the day. Morning routines aren't about efficiency, they're about anchoring. Small, repeated actions, folding the blanket, washing your face, boiling water. These aren't tasks to get through, they're rituals. And rituals carry meaning beyond motion. They signal to the mind, you are here, you are safe, you are beginning with intention. Throughout history, mornings were slow by necessity. A fire had to be lit, a floor swept clean, a body warmed by movement. These were not luxuries, they were structures. The architecture of days built on rhythm, not speed. Now, we trade rhythm for reaction. Alarms drag us into motion before awareness can catch up. Emails are checked before sunlight touches the window. The body moves, but the mind stumbles behind. And so, the day begins not with clarity, but with imbalance. Speed kills ritual, and without ritual, we drift. Try slowing one part of your morning, just one. Pour tea without multitasking. Breathe while tying your shoes. Let stillness touch you, even briefly, because the way you enter the day shapes everything that follows. Imagine yourself walking through the corridors of your own memory. You pass by doors marked with almosts and what ifs, each one slightly ajar, releasing a familiar draft of regret. You pause before one, maybe a job you didn't take, a message you never sent, a risk you talked yourself out of, and before you realize it, you're inside again, replaying the scene, revising your lines, aching for a version of yourself that never stepped forward. It's quiet, repetitive, and consuming. Across time and culture, humans have told stories of lost opportunities with reverence and grief. Ancient myths are full of doors that close forever, of paths not taken, of moments that pass like tides. But where stories end, the modern mind loops. Unlike pain that fades with time, regret often reactivates itself. Each mental revisit etches the neural pattern deeper. The event itself may be over, but the suffering becomes habitual. Psychologists call this rumination, the act of turning over a negative experience again and again without resolution. It mimics problem solving but achieves the opposite. Instead of learning, you relive. Instead of moving on, you orbit. The brain mistakes repetition for responsibility, as if revisiting the moment might one day rewrite it. But wounds reopened daily do not heal. They stay raw, unfinished, and central. And the more they occupy your thoughts, the more they define your identity. You begin to live not from the person you are now, but from the person you weren't then. Regret, unchecked, is not reflection, it's self-imprisonment. Now imagine leaving that room, not slamming the door, not pretending it was never there, just stepping back into the hallway, into now. A missed chance is not the end of your story, it is a comma, and the sentence that follows is still being written, not from failure, but from freedom. There are moments when you feel the words rise, a boundary you want to set, a truth that trembles just behind your lips. But then, the pause, the second thought, the inner voice that says, let it go, it's not worth it, stay quiet. And so you do. It feels like the noble choice. Silence often passes for maturity, for peacekeeping. You tell yourself you're being the bigger person, keeping the moment from unraveling. But over time, repeated silence becomes something else, a soft and steady self-erasure. You stay quiet not because the truth is unclear, but because speaking it might disrupt the calm. And the more you value external harmony over internal honesty, the more distant you become from your own voice. This kind of silence is not peaceful. It's tense, compressed. It stores the unsaid in your chest, in your jaw, in your thoughts. You play conversations over again in your mind, rewriting the parts you never spoke, hoping that next time you'll choose differently. But each time you swallow your truth, you teach yourself that your discomfort matters less than someone else's ease. And that lesson, learned often enough, makes it harder to recognize your needs at all. There is wisdom in restraint, but there is also courage in expression. Speaking your truth doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it just means choosing to exist fully, without shrinking, without editing. Imagine a moment where your voice is not an intrusion, but a presence, not a disruption, but a return. To speak gently, clearly, even imperfectly, that is not conflict. That is clarity. You don't have to say everything, but you owe yourself the chance to say something, not to change the world, but to remain whole within it. Imagine yourself speaking, gently, carefully. You make a choice, state a feeling, or set a boundary. But before the silence can settle, you rush to explain. You offer reasons, backstories, disclaimers. You soften your voice to make it easier for others to accept. You keep talking, not because they asked, but because something inside you did. Over time, this becomes a pattern, not a conversation, but a performance. One designed to prove you are reasonable, kind, worthy. In medieval courts, even the most innocent were taught to plead their case in elaborate detail, because silence then was seen as guilt. And in modern life, that echo remains. You explain so they won't misunderstand, won't judge, won't leave. But each extra word chips away at your own authority. When you justify too much, you invite doubt, first in others, then in yourself. You begin to question your own choices before anyone else does. You start believing that clarity needs defense, that truth must always be softened, that your needs are burdens to cushion. Now imagine saying less, not out of coldness, but out of self-trust. A simple sentence, a pause. Let the silence speak what doesn't need defending. At first, it feels uncomfortable, like standing without armor, but with time, you'll find that confidence often speaks quietest, and those who trust you won't need the extra pages. You finish the task, you meet the deadline, you arrive at the goal, and then, without pause, you're already reaching for the next. No breath, no stillness, no thank you. The moment passes unmarked, folded into the blur of doing, but something subtle is lost each time you move forward without looking back. Gratitude isn't about being polite. It's not a moral checklist. It's an anchor, a quiet way to remind your mind that not everything needs to be earned twice. That enough exists, even if just for a moment. In ancient cultures, harvest festivals weren't celebrations of excess. They were acknowledgments of survival, a pause between seasons to say, "We made it. This is enough, for now." Without that pause, the hunger would have returned too soon, not in the belly, but in the mind. Today, we consume without noticing, achieve without absorbing. Our milestones pile up like unread messages, each one waiting for recognition that never comes. And without thanks, the mind forgets how to feel full. It forgets what it already has. It stays hungry, even in abundance. You don't need to journal or chant. You just need to notice. The taste of clean water, the way light lands on the floor, the person who answered your call, the task you dreaded, now complete. Tiny recognitions, spoken or silent, that stitch your day together with meaning. Gratitude isn't a break from progress, it's what makes progress feel real. Without it, you're always chasing. With it, you remember you've already arrived, at least for a moment. Imagine placing all your weight on a single stone in the middle of a river. You tell yourself it will hold. You believe it must. But then the current shifts. The stone slips. And suddenly, belief isn't enough. This is the risk of confidence without foundation. We often glorify all-in thinking, burning bridges, betting everything on one path. It sounds bold, pure, but real strength isn't in stubborn certainty. It's in flexibility, in preparation, in knowing that if Plan A falters, Plan B can still hold the line. Ancient builders knew this. Temples had extra columns. Ships carried spare sails. Not because they expected failure, but because they respected it. Confidence wasn't blind, it was supported. In modern life, we're told to trust ourselves, to move without fear. But if one missed opportunity unravels your entire direction, the trust might not be deep. It might just be fragile. Backup plans aren't signs of weakness. They're quiet forms of wisdom. They soften the edge of failure. They give you room to pivot, to reframe, to continue. And most importantly, they remind you that identity isn't tied to one outcome. Consider where you've placed all your weight. Is there another stone nearby? Should the current shift? Not because you'll need it, but because if you do, you'll be ready. Imagine yourself in a conversation where something inside you tightens. A truth rises, gentle but real. A boundary, a disagreement, a feeling that wants to be named. But instead, you smile, you nod, you say, "It's fine," even though it isn't. The moment passes, unbroken on the surface. Peace is preserved, but inside, something shifts. A subtle fracture, a quiet disloyalty to the self. Across cultures and centuries, people have prized social harmony. In ancient China, Confucian teachings upheld the value of group cohesion over individual assertion. In Japan, the concept of tatemae, the face you present, was often favored over honne, the private truth. Even in Western societies, politeness has long been mistaken for goodness. But when truth is consistently swallowed in the name of calm, the storm doesn't vanish, it moves inward. Modern psychology speaks of cognitive dissonance, the stress we feel when our actions contradict our values. Telling a small lie to protect someone else might feel noble once. But over time, repeated dishonesty, especially to avoid conflict, builds tension in the mind. You become divided, the you that speaks and the you that remains unheard. Eventually, the cost isn't just discomfort, it's erosion. Your clarity, your integrity, your ability to trust yourself all begin to fray. Harmony built on silence is delicate. It demands performance. And each time you lie to keep the peace, you teach yourself that truth is dangerous, that your voice is a threat, that your needs are disruptions. But real peace is not the absence of noise, it's the presence of understanding. And that understanding begins with honesty, spoken not with cruelty, but with care. Now imagine telling the truth, just one small truth, gently, without defense, not to confront but to align. With others, yes, but more importantly, with yourself. Because inner war doesn't begin with a shout, it begins with a whisper never said. You say it without thinking. I'm just bad with money. I always mess this up. That's just who I am. Harmless, casual, almost forgettable. But the brain remembers. Each time you speak the phrase, it digs a little deeper, etching itself into the grooves of identity until it stops sounding like an opinion and starts feeling like truth. Language is not just a way to express thought, it's a way to reinforce it. The words you repeat become scripts, not just things you say, but roles you perform. And like an actor trapped in a single part, you begin to forget that you ever had other lines to choose from. These unconscious phrases often hide behind humor or humility. You laugh them off, say them in passing. But they quietly shape your decisions. You avoid applying, trying, asking, stepping forward because the story has already been told. You're not good at that. You've never been. Sometimes they come from others, words spoken long ago by a parent, a teacher, a friend. You adopted them without realizing, wore them like hand-me-downs that never quite fit, but felt familiar enough to keep. But repetition doesn't mean truth, it means habit. And habits can be rewritten. Imagine noticing the next phrase before it escapes, not with judgment, but with curiosity. Is this still true? Was it ever? That pause, small as it is, breaks the loop, opens a window. Because self-definition isn't carved in stone, it's whispered in the quiet moments, chosen in the phrases you allow to stay. You don't need to shout a new identity. Just stop echoing the old one. That alone begins to change the role. Imagine someone offers you a kind word, a quiet compliment, sincere, simple. Maybe they admire your work, your effort, or just your presence. But almost without thinking, you reject it, you shrug, you downplay. It was nothing. Anyone could have done it. I just got lucky. The moment passes, but something subtle has happened. A seed of self-worth was offered, and you turned it away. This reflex often feels polite, even modest. But repetition has power. Each time you brush off praise, you teach your mind to question it, to believe that appreciation is misplaced, that acknowledgement must be dodged or softened. And in time, it becomes more than habit. It becomes identity, a quiet refusal to be seen. In many cultures, praise was once met with humility out of tradition. In old European etiquette, deflection was grace. In Eastern thought, selflessness was virtue. But humility is not the same as invisibility. And rejecting kindness doesn't make you stronger. It makes you unseen, even to yourself. Now imagine letting the words in, just for a breath. No argument, no apology. A simple thank you. That small pause, awkward, unfamiliar, begins to rewire something deeper. Not arrogance, not pride, just permission. To let yourself feel worthy, even for a moment. And in that moment, something long denied begins to settle gently into place. It starts small. A thought, half-formed. What if I'd said yes? What if I'd stayed? What if I never left? You don't mean to linger there, but the mind slips easily into alternate timelines, roads not taken, words not spoken, futures you didn't live. And suddenly, you're far from where you are. What-ifs have a way of disguising themselves as insight. They feel productive, like reflection. But more often, they are traps. Quiet loops that borrow energy from the present and bury it in places that don't exist. In old sailor lore, men were warned not to chart courses by ghost maps, sketches of imagined lands filled with danger and mirage. You could stare at them for hours, lose yourself in possibilities, but never move an inch closer to shore. The lesson was simple: to navigate where you are, not where you wish you'd been. When you dwell on what-ifs, you train your brain to mistrust the present. You teach it to believe that meaning lies somewhere else, in another version of you. But those versions aren't real. Only this one breathes. Only this one acts. That doesn't mean you can't wonder. Wonder is part of being human. But there's a difference between visiting the past and setting up camp there, between learning from possibility and being ruled by it. Imagine this. Instead of asking, what if things had gone differently, you ask, what can I do with what's still mine? Instead of rehearsing regret, you practice return to the moment, to the power that only exists when you're fully here, because every what if pulls you away from the only place anything can change, now. Imagine yourself in a room full of voices, some measured, some loud, some meandering. You have a thought, a point, a quiet insight forming, but you hold it. The moment passes. Someone else speaks. The meeting moves on, and nothing seems lost, except, slowly, a part of you. Every unsaid idea leaves a faint imprint. It's easy to think silence protects you from judgment, from conflict, from saying the wrong thing. But silence has a cost. Over time, it becomes invisible. You were there, but not quite. Present, but uncounted. And eventually, others begin to reflect that back. Perception matters, not for ego, but for trust. In older councils, even the softest voice carried weight if it offered clarity. Decisions were shaped not by volume, but by presence. A shared fire, a circle of peers, and the simple rhythm of contribution. To stay silent wasn't humility, it was absence. In modern rooms, it's no different. You may not notice it, but every time you stay quiet, the perception of your value, externally and internally, shrinks slightly. You begin to question your own insight, not because it's lacking, but because it's unused. One sentence can be enough, a thoughtful reflection, a calm observation, not to dominate, but to mark that you were there and that your mind was working. Because presence isn't just physical, it's the willingness to be heard. Imagine yourself walking along a quiet sidewalk. No rain, no wind, no particular rush. Yet your eyes remain fixed on the ground, tracing cracks in the pavement, avoiding faces, avoiding sky. You pass people without truly passing them. Your shoulders curl inward, your steps are quick, and your presence, without meaning to, begins to shrink. No one notices, but your body does. So does your mind. In ancient societies, posture was more than physical. It was symbolic. Warriors stood tall, not just to intimidate, but to feel capable. In Roman arenas, even the defeated were judged by how they held their spine. Across cultures, upright posture was a signal of inner worth, not vanity. And in rituals of mourning or guilt, the head bowed, deliberately, ritually, because posture was always linked to state of being. Modern science confirms what tradition always sensed. Your body speaks inward as much as it speaks outward. A lowered head, collapsed chest, shortened breath, all of these trigger chemical shifts. Cortisol rises, testosterone dips. The brain, scanning for cues, assumes submission, anxiety, or defeat. It doesn't matter why you're walking that way. Your body believes the signal it's sending, and over time, you believe it too. This feedback loop is quiet, but powerful. The more you shrink, the less seen you feel. The less seen you feel, the less you believe you belong. Confidence isn't always a mindset. It's often muscle memory, rehearsed in posture long before it becomes a thought. Now imagine walking with the sky in your periphery. Not with arrogance, not with performance, just with alignment. A soft lift of the chin, a deeper breath, a reminder that you occupy space, and that space is yours to claim. You don't need to announce it. You only need to stop apologizing for being here, and sometimes, the first apology is written in how you stand. You sit with your work, an idea, a sentence, a sketch. At first, there's life in it. Imperfect, maybe, but vivid. Then comes the impulse to refine. You adjust a word, shift a line, erase and replace again and again, until the original spark feels distant, buried under layers of precision. Perfection can begin as care, a desire to do something well, but unchecked, it becomes a cage, a quiet kind of fear dressed up as discipline. You convince yourself it's not ready, that with just one more pass, it'll finally be good enough. But the truth is, you're not fixing the work. You're shielding it from judgment, from exposure, from the vulnerability of being seen unfinished. What dies in this process is not just momentum, but breath. Creation needs air. It needs release, a chance to exist outside of your control. When every phrase must be perfect, every brushstroke exact, the work stops being an expression and starts being a performance for an imagined critic who never sleeps. You may tell yourself you're being meticulous, that real artists revise endlessly. And it's true. Refinement has its place, but there's a line between shaping your work and suffocating it. Imagine letting something go before it's flawless. Imagine trusting the rough edges, the quiet flaws, not because they're perfect, but because they're real. Creation is not about impressing, it's about revealing. And what's most human in your work is often what you tried hardest to erase. Let it breathe. Let it leave your hands. It may not be perfect, but it will be alive. Imagine a quiet moment, a walk, a meal, a pause between tasks. But even there, your pocket buzzes. A message, a ping, a blinking light. You glance without thinking. One reply becomes three. The pause evaporates. The moment is gone. You were never truly alone, even in silence. In ancient times, solitude was built into life. Letters took days to arrive. Distance meant rest. Even kings waited for news. But now, distance has collapsed. Connection is constant. And while technology offers ease, it also dissolves the boundaries that once protected our thoughts, our time, our presence. When you're always reachable, you're never fully arrived in your own day. Your attention is shared, borrowed, claimed by others. You may not notice it at first, just attention, a scattered thought, a breath held too long. But your mind begins to forget how to be still, how to belong only to you. We tell ourselves it's necessary, that being available is responsible, kind, efficient. But what if it's also eroding something softer, the part of you that reflects, that wanders, that simply is, without input, without interruption? Now imagine turning the phone face down, setting a time, a space, a gentle no. At first, it feels rebellious, then relieving. The silence that follows isn't empty, it's yours. And slowly your mind returns, whole, intact, unclaimed. You feel the tension rise, words sharpen, your chest tightens just enough to notice. You're not listening anymore, you're loading, preparing your next point, your rebuttal, your defense. The goal isn't understanding now, it's winning. But in trying to win the argument, something else slips away. Curiosity, connection, the possibility of growth. You may walk away with your pride intact, but your mind unchanged. In ancient philosophical circles, dialogue wasn't a contest, it was a practice. Thinkers would sit in long courtyards, exchanging ideas not to defeat one another, but to refine their own understanding. The moment someone won, the conversation ended, and that was seen as a kind of failure, because growth lives in the friction, not the victory. Today, debate is everywhere, in traffic, at dinner, online, and often, it's not about truth, but territory. Who sounds smarter? Who speaks louder? Who walks away feeling justified? But when ego becomes the compass, wisdom loses direction. Arguing to win is tempting. It feels strong. It feels clear. But it usually builds walls, not bridges. And the person you shut down doesn't change. They just stop talking. And maybe you do too, later, when the adrenaline fades and the point you proved feels oddly hollow. But imagine entering disagreement not as a battlefield, but as an invitation. To ask instead of assert. To pause instead of pounce. Not to surrender your view, but to see what it's missing. Because the real victory isn't in being right. It's in being willing to see more than you saw before. Imagine looking back at an old photo, your clothes different, your posture uncertain, your choices unfamiliar. You cringe. You shake your head. What was I thinking? It feels like reflection, but underneath something colder often hides, quiet self-rejection. Belittling who you once were may feel like growth, but it's not. It's distance without compassion. Every past version of you, awkward, misguided, impulsive, was trying. trying to understand, to adapt, to become. They may not have known better, but they moved anyway. And without those steps, flawed as they were, you wouldn't be here now. Ancient traditions honored the idea of the self as unfolding, a soul shaped over time, each stage sacred. Mistakes weren't mocked, they were marked, recorded in journals, sung in songs, carved into temple walls, not as shame, but as proof of becoming. Modern self-improvement often forgets this. It urges us to cut ties with who we were, to rebrand, outgrow, leave behind. But growth isn't about abandonment, it's about integration. If you treat your former self as something to discard, you'll always fear your own imperfections. And without mercy for the past, there's no safety in the present. Try this. Speak gently to the version of you who didn't know what you know now. Thank them for surviving, for choosing, for trying. Because evolution doesn't require shame, only continuity. Imagine yourself alone in a room, reflecting on a small mistake, a forgotten task, a misstep in conversation, a goal still unfinished. The words rise uninvited. I'm so stupid. I always mess this up. Why can't I ever get it right? They don't scream, they whisper. And because no one else hears them, you let them pass unchecked, like fog drifting across your mind. But your brain hears, and it listens closely. Throughout history, words have held sacred power. In ancient cultures, names and phrases were believed to shape reality. Incantations, mantras, blessings. To speak was to create. Today, we forget this. We treat self-criticism as casual honesty, even humility. But the mind doesn't distinguish between jest and decree. Each time you insult yourself, even in passing, the brain etches a little deeper into the neural pathways that define your self-concept. Neuroscience calls this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on repeated thoughts. What you say about yourself, especially with emotion, becomes easier to believe, easier to repeat. Over time, the words "I'm not enough" evolve from a moment of doubt into a subconscious truth. Not because it's true, but because it's been rehearsed. And this rehearsal doesn't stay internal. It leaks into posture, into choices, into how you let others treat you. Self-talk becomes a script, and the more often you repeat the lines, the more convincing your performance becomes, even to yourself. Now imagine saying something different. Not forced affirmations, not grand declarations, just a quieter voice that says, I made a mistake, but I'm learning. This is hard, but I'm trying. It might feel unnatural at first, because kindness is a language we're taught to extend outward, not inward. But the brain listens just the same, and it can learn a new groove, one that allows you to grow rather than shrink, one where your words build rather than bruise. You sit with the idea. It's there, somewhere, a project, a change, a step you know you want to take. But you're waiting for the feeling, for the spark, that perfect moment when everything aligns and action feels effortless. Until then, you stay still, quiet, stalled. We're taught to romanticize inspiration, the lightning bolt, the breakthrough, the muse that arrives unannounced and transforms our energy. But in truth, inspiration is rarely the beginning. More often, it's the reward that follows movement, not the force that precedes it. Discipline feels less glamorous. There's no cinematic swell, just a decision. Then another, a slow return to the work, even when it feels dull or directionless. You don't wait to feel ready. You begin, knowing readiness may come later, or not at all. Because the spark doesn't live in stillness, it hides in repetition, in the quiet rhythm of showing up, the body in motion, the handwriting, the mind trying even poorly, and somewhere in that motion, something stirs. Not always big, not always bright, but enough. When you wait too long for motivation, you start to believe you're incapable without it, that your potential depends on mood. But discipline doesn't ask how you feel, it only asks what you'll choose. Imagine building without waiting to feel inspired. Imagine trusting that the heat comes after the fire is lit, not before. That momentum is something you earn by starting cold. Creation is not about magic, it's about movement. And often, the first step feels small, uninspired, uncertain. But that's where most real beginnings live: quiet, uncelebrated, but in motion. Imagine a small moment, someone says something sharp or plans suddenly change. Before the thought has fully formed, your heart races, your chest tightens, words fly out, or silence hardens. The emotion feels true, immediate, overwhelming. But later, with distance, you see it differently. The moment passed, but your reaction left a trace. In ancient philosophies, from Stoicism to Zen, there was one shared principle: pause. The idea that between stimulus and response, there is a space, a breath, a choice. But in modern life, that space has shrunk. Notifications demand instant replies. Conversations move fast. Feelings flare and spill without time to cool. When we react without reflection, we train the mind to live on edge. Every challenge feels personal. Every disappointment, final. The nervous system forgets how to wait. Instead of moving through emotion, we become entangled in it, each reaction feeding the next, like sparks chasing one another in a dry field. It isn't about suppressing how you feel. Emotion is information. But unfiltered emotion, unexamined and unanchored, can become a lens that distorts everything you see. Over time, the mind begins to spiral before it even understands what it's reacting to. Now imagine pausing, not forever, just for a breath, feeling the wave rise, but choosing not to ride it just yet. In that stillness, the emotion softens, perspective widens, and the reaction that might have ruled you releases you instead. The weeks pass quickly, too quickly. One blends into the next, tasks half finished, intentions forgotten. You keep moving, but the shape of your life stays blurry. And then suddenly, it's August, or November, or a new year entirely. You wonder where the time went, but time didn't vanish. It simply went unobserved. Without a pause to look back, the rhythm of your life becomes reactive. You respond, you repeat, but you don't always realign. And that's where momentum slips. Not in the chaos of a single bad day, but in the quiet absence of reflection across many. Ancient farmers followed the lunar calendar not just to track crops, but to track themselves. Each moon cycle brought a new question. What worked? What failed? What changed? These weren't resolutions. They were recalibrations, tiny course corrections that kept the whole year from drifting off course. Today, our calendars are filled, but rarely felt. We plan events, we chase goals, but we often forget to sit down at the end of the month and simply ask, what happened to me? Not in a dramatic way, not in a spreadsheet, just a moment of stillness, to notice the patterns returning, the promises broken, the little victories overlooked. Without this pause, 12 months can become 12 blurs, and a year is lost, not in catastrophe, but in repetition. So before the next month begins, try stopping for 10 quiet minutes. With a pen, or just a thought. Ask what the last few weeks were really made of. You might be surprised at how much you remember, and how much you're finally ready to change. Imagine lying down after a long day. The room is quiet. Your body sinks into the softness beneath you. But the silence isn't peaceful. It's tense. Your mind starts whispering, "You didn't do enough. You should still be working. You haven't earned this. This isn't rest. It's self-punishment in disguise." Somewhere along the way, rest became guilt. The pause between efforts began to feel like failure. You may not say it aloud, but the message is clear. If you're not producing, you're wasting. And your nervous system listens. Over time, the body begins to brace, even in stillness. Ancient cultures often revered rest. Farmers worked with seasons, not against them. Winters were for mending tools, storytelling, gathering near firelight. Rest wasn't a reward, it was a rhythm, a sacred part of existence. But modern life erased those seasons, replaced cycles with constant output. Now, even our leisure must be optimized. And so, rest becomes haunted by guilt. This teaches the brain that peace is unsafe, that stillness is suspicious, and slowly, the ability to truly relax disappears. Even sleep becomes shallow. Even weekends feel heavy. But rest is not the opposite of progress. It's what makes progress sustainable. Try this. Lie down without apology. Breathe without proving anything. Let the stillness speak for itself. You don't have to earn rest. You are allowed to have it. Imagine yourself in a familiar moment, reacting too quickly, procrastinating again, reaching for the same old excuse. You feel the impulse rise, automatic and practiced. And then, like a sigh that ends the conversation, you say it. I can't help it. A phrase so small it barely seems worth noticing. But in that sentence, something profound happens, not to the world around you, but to the architecture of your mind. Across history, personal agency has been both feared and revered. The Stoics believed that control over one's own behavior, no matter how small, was the root of all freedom. In Eastern philosophies, the mind was trained like a garden, not to be silenced, but to be guided with patience. But when you say, I can't help it, you surrender that garden to weeds, you offer your habits a throne, and step aside. Modern psychology calls this learned helplessness, the process by which a person, after repeated difficulty or perceived failure, begins to believe they are incapable of change. Over time, this belief becomes its own reward. If you can't help it, you're no longer responsible. And if you're not responsible, there's no pressure to try. The brain, ever efficient, begins to automate this loop. Neural pathways grow thicker, and helplessness becomes habit. But here's the truth the phrase conceals. Most patterns are not unchangeable. They are just repeated. And repetition is not destiny. It's training. To say I can't help it is to train the mind to stop looking for the lever, the opening, the small space where change begins. Now imagine saying something else. This is hard, but I'm noticing it. I've done this before, but I want to learn another way. These aren't bold declarations. They're keys, not to instant transformation, but to unlocking the first door. Because once you stop repeating the phrase that seals you in, you may find that what felt like a wall was, all along, a hallway. You move from one voice to the next. Messages, meetings, music, scrolling noise that fills the empty corners of your day. Even in stillness, there's background sound. A podcast while you cook, a video while you eat, something, anything, to keep you from being fully alone. It feels normal, harmless, connected. But slowly, without noticing, your inner voice begins to quiet. Not because it has nothing to say, but because it can't be heard through the constant hum. Solitude isn't absence. It's space. A necessary silence where your thoughts aren't shaped by someone else's tone, opinion, or urgency. It's where ideas soften into clarity, where emotions, long pushed aside, return in honest form. It's not always comfortable, but it is always revealing. Avoiding solitude doesn't mean you're weak. It often means you're tired of the noise inside, the questions you'd rather avoid. But when you constantly turn away from that silence, you also turn away from yourself. And without time alone, your sense of self becomes diluted, shaped more by reaction than reflection. You start to lose track of what you think, what you want, what you feel, until every choice feels influenced, every decision filtered. You become fluent in everyone else's language, but forget how to speak your own. Imagine giving yourself a few quiet minutes, no input, no performance, just you. It won't always feel profound. Sometimes it'll be boring, restless. But sometimes, in the middle of that quiet, something hidden will rise. A thought you didn't know you needed, a feeling waiting to be noticed. Solitude is not withdrawal, it's return. Not disconnection, but clarity. And in a world that constantly speaks, choosing silence is how you finally hear. Imagine yourself in a room where everyone seems certain. about what they like, what they do, what they find exciting. You feel slightly out of rhythm, so you adjust. You nod, you agree, you laugh at things you don't find funny, praise things you don't understand. At first, it feels harmless, social glue, but over time, the performance settles deeper. Across history, people have shaped themselves to survive, adapting speech, interests, even faith to belong. In royal courts, it was politics. In village life, it was safety. Today, it's quieter. A favorite band you don't listen to, a hobby you pretend to love, a version of you edited for acceptance. But each time you bend away from your truth, something shifts. A small, almost invisible fracture forms between who you are and who you've presented. It seems like connection, but it's made of distance. The conversations grow, but your sense of self thins. This isn't about being difficult or refusing to grow. You can explore new things, stay open, adapt. But the difference is subtle. One is curiosity, the other is abandonment. One expands you, the other erases you. Now imagine staying still the next time you feel the pull to perform. You don't shrink, but you don't bend either. You let the silence stand, and in that honesty, even if no one claps, you remain whole. And sometimes, that's the beginning of true belonging. You wake up, and before your feet touch the floor, the thoughts begin. What if I fail? What if I'm wrong? What if something goes wrong again? It's subtle, like background noise you've grown used to. But it's there. Fear, not as a moment but a lens. And through it, everything looks sharper, colder, heavier. When fear is your starting point, the world shrinks. You question every opportunity, second guess every instinct, hesitate before every door. Risk looks like recklessness. Hope feels naive. And safety, even when it cages you, feels like wisdom. In ancient cave societies, fear kept people alive. It warned of predators, storms, betrayal. But it was a flare, not a compass. It wasn't meant to lead, only to alert. Today, we've made it the narrator. Every decision begins with the worst-case scenario. Every plan is filtered through a dozen imagined disasters. But fear is a terrible architect. It builds small rooms. It favors repetition over discovery. And the longer you let it design your life, the more it convinces you that the walls are for your own good. This doesn't mean ignoring danger. It means learning the difference between signal and story, between a moment of caution and a lifetime of retreat. Imagine starting a day not with defense, but with attention. Not what if it goes wrong, but what if it finally works. The risk is the same, but the story shifts, because fear will always speak. But it doesn't have to go first. Imagine stepping into a room and feeling yourself become smaller, not physically, but subtly. Your voice softens, your laughter fades, you hesitate before speaking, not because you want to, but because something inside you whispers that space must be made for them. This is the quiet habit of shrinking. Around certain people, you begin to edit, not just your words, but your energy. You mold your presence into something more palatable, more agreeable, less disruptive. You tell yourself it's diplomacy or kindness, but deep down, something else is happening. You are teaching your identity to fold. Throughout history, people have adapted to survive. We've worn masks to fit tribes, to avoid conflict, to stay safe. And sometimes, those instincts protect us. But when they become patterns, when your sense of self adjusts automatically for someone else's comfort, you begin to disappear from your own life. You become a version of yourself curated for their ease. The danger isn't just in the moment, it's in the repetition. Over time, your mind forgets which version is real. Your boundaries blur, your confidence thins, and silently, your nervous system learns that authenticity comes with risk. But you were not made to be manageable. Notice who you shrink around, and ask yourself why. Then, just once, try taking up your full space anyway. Speak plainly. Breathe deeply. Let the silence after your words hang. You may find that the right people make room, and the wrong ones move on. Imagine yourself mid-conversation. Your mouth moves faster than your mind, filling silence with whatever surfaces first. A half-formed opinion, a reflexive comment, a joke that lands just off-center. You didn't mean harm, you barely noticed. But as the moment passes, a faint dissonance lingers, not from what was said exactly, but from how little it was meant. When words lose their anchor, they become noise, echoes without signal, motion without meaning. In ancient traditions, speech was sacred. In Egypt, the god Thoth governed not just writing, but thought, language, and judgment, because to speak was to cast a spell on reality. In many indigenous cultures, silence was not emptiness, but reverence, a space that gave words their shape. People were taught to wait, to let their thoughts settle like silt before speaking, because when every word is measured, every voice carries weight. But in modern life, speed is praised. Quick replies, instant opinions, constant output. In this noise, we begin to treat speech as filler rather than formation. We respond to fill space, to avoid awkwardness, to prove we're listening, even when we're not. Over time, the brain adapts. Thought thins. Meaning blurs. And the habit of talking without thinking becomes not just a social tic, but a cognitive one. The mind loses its depth, trained to skim rather than dive. Psychologists have found that people who speak impulsively often experience increased regret and decreased trust in themselves. Not because their thoughts are wrong, but because their thoughts are rushed, unfiltered. The voice becomes reactive, not reflective. And in that reactivity, something essential is lost: intention. Now imagine the opposite: a pause before you speak, a breath between thought and word, not silence as avoidance, but silence as calibration. You speak less, perhaps, but when you do, it lands. It matters. Your voice, no longer a reflex, becomes a signal again, a steady tone in a world full of static. You meet someone new. They smile, they speak well, they seem genuine, and without realizing, you lean in, mentally, emotionally, sometimes even deeply. You open the door wide, no questions asked. You share too soon, rely too fast, believe without pause. It feels kind, brave even. But there's a difference between kindness and surrender. Instant trust feels noble, like a clean slate for every soul you meet. But trust, real trust, is not a gift handed out freely. It's a bridge built slowly, plank by plank, over time. When you skip the building, you fall into hope rather than wisdom. Blind openness doesn't make you compassionate, it makes you unguarded. And in a world where not everyone sees your heart with care, that openness can cost more than you expect. It's not about paranoia, it's about pattern, about learning to notice what's said and what isn't, what's shown and what's repeated. You may tell yourself you're just giving people the benefit of the doubt, but too often, that doubt bends only one way, away from your own safety. You downplay your intuition. You explain away the warning signs. You stay longer than you should, because trust was granted without being earned. Imagine instead holding space without handing over the keys, listening without spilling everything, offering warmth without laying yourself bare. This isn't coldness, it's discernment. Trust doesn't have to be a wall, but it should be a filter. Not everyone who enters your life should enter your story. And not every friendly face is a safe one. Openness is beautiful when it's chosen with care. When your boundaries are not a punishment, but a way of protecting the parts of you still learning who's worth letting in. Imagine a moment of calm, nothing urgent, no fires to put out. The silence is soft, but something inside you resists. You check your phone. You pick a fight in your head. You stir the stillness until it breaks, and then you feel it. Chaos, noise, motion. Uncomfortable but familiar. Strangely safe. For some, disorder isn't an accident. It's a pattern learned early. Homes filled with shouting, sudden shifts, love that came and went without warning. In that world, peace was suspicious. Quiet was the space before something broke. So you grew into it, tuned your nervous system to unpredictability. And now, as an adult, stillness feels foreign, unsafe. You might call it bad luck, or a restless mind, or just being dramatic. But often, it's loyalty. Not to a person or a place, but to a rhythm. One that tells you things are only real if they're intense. That love must hurt. That stability is boring. And so you seek out the storms. You create them, chase them, live in their wreckage. But peace isn't absence, it's presence. A deeper kind, one that doesn't demand, one that lets you exhale. At first, it will feel wrong, too quiet, too easy. But that's not a warning, it's withdrawal from chaos, from pain dressed as passion. Now imagine choosing not to stir the stillness, letting calm remain even when your body begs for noise. Over time, the discomfort fades, and in its place, a new kind of safety begins to grow, one that doesn't require your destruction to feel alive. The lights go off, the screen dims, you collapse into bed, but your mind doesn't follow. It's still running, replaying conversations, listing tasks, wondering what you forgot. Sleep hovers just out of reach, tangled in the clutter of an unfinished day. We treat rest as a switch, something we flip when we're too exhausted to keep going. But the mind doesn't move like that. It carries momentum. And without a pause, it doesn't land. It loops. In older traditions, nightfall wasn't the end. It was a ritual. Farmers would sit by the fading fire, recounting the day aloud. Sailors at sea would mark journals before turning in, not for nostalgia, for closure. A way to signal to the brain, we're done now. Today, we rush through the last hour, scrolling, multitasking, brushing teeth while checking messages. The day doesn't end, it just collapses. And what doesn't get processed gets carried into dreams, into tension, into tomorrow. The end-of-day pause isn't dramatic. It's small, a minute of stillness, a glance back at what mattered, a whispered thank you, a single breath where you release the version of yourself who tried, failed, succeeded, coped, letting them go, gently, before you sleep. Because rest isn't just physical, it's mental permission, and without it, sleep becomes survival instead of restoration. So tonight, before the darkness folds around you, try stopping, just for a moment. You don't need a journal, just presence. The kind that says, I was here today, and now I release it. Imagine laughing along with a joke about yourself. Maybe it's about how clumsy you are, how you always mess things up, how you're just not that smart. You smile, others laugh, the moment passes, but the echo stays. Toxic jokes are the kind that sting a little, even when wrapped in humor, especially when wrapped in humor. And over time, repetition turns them into beliefs. You hear it enough, even from your own mouth, and the mind begins to accept it as truth. I'm always late. I never get it right. I'm the dumb one in the group. What begins as a laugh becomes a quiet mantra. Historically, humor has been a way to cope, to disarm pain, to belong. In tight-knit communities, jokes created connection. But when that humor turns inward, when it sharpens instead of softens, it starts to wear grooves into the self, especially when no one corrects it, especially when you keep saying it yourself. The brain listens, even when you're joking. And soon, you're not just entertaining others, you're reinforcing an identity built on insult, one you wouldn't allow anyone else to assign to you, yet you repeat with a smile, as if pain becomes lighter when disguised as wit. But you don't have to be the punchline to be heard. Try noticing which jokes leave a bruise, which laughs feel a little hollow. Then, try silence instead. Let your presence be enough without the need to self-deprecate, because not every wound needs a joke, and not every laugh is worth the cost. Imagine yourself holding a memory like an unfinished letter, no return address, no final sentence, a conversation left hanging, a betrayal unacknowledged. a goodbye that never came. You carry it for days, for years, waiting for something, an apology, an explanation, a moment of recognition that never arrives. And so, the wound stays open, not because of its depth, but because of its silence. You tell yourself you'll feel better when they respond, when they see, when they say what you need to hear. But that waiting becomes its own kind of prison. Across cultures, closure has always been deeply human. Ancient rituals helped the grieving say farewell. Letters were burned, names were carved into stone. But the ritual was never meant to change the past. It was meant to change the person holding it. Today, we wait not for ritual, but for reply. We hand our peace to those who may never return it, anchoring our healing to their willingness, their timing, their growth. And in doing so, we abandon the one part of the story we still control, our own release. Modern psychology warns of this trap. When closure depends on someone else's actions, your emotional state becomes contingent, dependent on a variable you can't control. It feeds resentment, fuels obsessive thoughts, and delays recovery. The narrative loops. Why did they do it? Why won't they acknowledge it? Each question, though justified, ties you tighter to the source of your pain. But true closure doesn't always arrive as clarity. Sometimes it's a quiet decision, made without answers. A moment when you stop knocking on a door that was never meant to open. You close it yourself, not because the story makes sense, but because your peace matters more than the explanation. Now imagine placing that unfinished letter down, not burning it, not erasing it, just letting it be incomplete. You don't need their words to free you, you need your own. And in speaking them, to yourself, for yourself, you begin the real ending, the one only you can write. You pack the extra charger, the old jacket, the forgotten file, just in case. You agree to plans you don't want, keep numbers you no longer call, hold on to belongings you haven't touched in years. It feels responsible, prepared. But beneath the surface, there's something else, a quiet fear of being caught without. Just in case sounds wise. It wraps itself in logic, but used too often, it becomes clutter, not just in your bag or your calendar, but in your mind. You begin to live in imagined futures, preparing for problems that haven't arrived, negotiating with outcomes that haven't happened. What starts as caution becomes hesitation. You don't delete, you don't decide. You carry options like armor, hoping that with enough of them, you'll never be wrong. But carrying too much weighs you down. And slowly, you begin to forget the difference between being ready and being afraid. Fear dresses up as preparation all the time. It tells you that certainty is safety, that commitment is a risk, that letting go is dangerous. And so, you keep doors open that lead nowhere. You say yes when you mean no. You stay, not because it's right, but because leaving would mean trust. Imagine choosing with clarity instead, saying, "This is enough," not because you know the future, but because you know yourself. True preparation isn't about hoarding, it's about confidence. The kind that says, if the unexpected happens, I'll adapt. I don't need to carry everything to face anything. Just in case is useful, sometimes. But when it becomes a reflex, it's no longer a strategy. It's a fear of letting go. And often, what you're carrying isn't protection. It's delay. Imagine yourself in the same chair, in the same posture, hour after hour. The screen glows. Your hands move, but the rest of you stays still. The mind begins to blur. Thoughts repeat. Focus slips, then returns in shallow waves. You aren't tired exactly, but something feels stuck, as if your thoughts, like your body, are holding their breath. In ancient times, thinking was rarely done sitting still. Greek philosophers walked as they spoke. In Eastern monasteries, movement was woven into meditation. Even the scribes of the Middle Ages stood often, stretching between pages. The body was seen not as separate from thought, but as its vessel, its partner. Modern life separates the two. Work becomes a stillness imposed, shoulders hunched, hips locked, breath shallow. But the cost isn't only physical. When the body stays fixed, creativity narrows, decisions harden, ideas come slower. The mind mirrors the body's rigidity, and flexibility fades on both sides. We adapt to this slowly, convincing ourselves it's efficient, but over time, the stillness becomes a ceiling. Productivity plateaus, mood dips, and we wonder why clarity won't return. Now imagine standing up, not in rebellion, but in rhythm. A few steps, a stretch, a shift in view. The body reawakens, and with it, the mind. Not every solution is found at a desk. Some arrive in motion, in the quiet wisdom of limbs that were never meant to be still for so long. You push the best part aside, the favorite bite on the plate, the beautiful outfit still hanging in the closet, the vacation you'll take someday. You tell yourself it's wisdom, discipline, maybe even maturity, but the message you're sending runs deeper than you think. Every time you delay joy, you teach your brain something quiet and dangerous. Pleasure is unsafe, that good things must be postponed, that enjoyment is suspicious, only allowed after enough struggle, enough waiting, enough proof. In older traditions, celebration wasn't saved for the end. It was woven into the ordinary. Morning prayers paired with warm bread, bright fabric worn for no occasion, music played at dusk, not because of triumph, but because the day existed. They understood something we've forgotten, that joy isn't the reward, it's the rhythm. Today, we defer. We save the candle, skip the dance, close the drawer where the good things wait. But what are we waiting for? Certainty, deservedness, a life without stress. That life may never come. And meanwhile, the parts that could make this one beautiful remain sealed, untouched, almost forgotten. This doesn't mean indulgence. It means presence. Letting beauty exist now, even if the day wasn't perfect, even if you didn't do everything right, especially then. Imagine unwrapping the thing you've been saving, not as a treat, but as a statement. That joy doesn't need permission, that you don't have to earn what already stirs your spirit, because when you stop saving joy for later, something shifts. Life feels less like a test, and more like something you're allowed to enjoy while you're still living it. Imagine speaking to someone, your thoughts slowly unfolding, your voice finding shape, and midway through, their eyes flick down to a screen, a glow, a scroll. A split second of silence fills the space, sharper than words. You continue, but the connection has already thinned. It's subtle, but it leaves a mark. Looking at screens while talking sends a quiet message. This moment is not enough. And though it may not be meant harshly, the impact is real. Trust, like attention, is built through presence. And presence requires more than just being in the same room. It requires seeing and being seen. In earlier times, conversations unfolded slowly. Eye contact lingered. Words carried weight not just through sound, but through shared stillness. Around fires, at dinner tables, in quiet walks through fields, attention was undivided because it had nowhere else to be. Now, it's split 100 ways. A message buzzes, a timeline refreshes, a notification flickers, and with each glance away, a thread loosens. Over time, relationships grow thinner, not because love fades, but because presence does. The screen doesn't just interrupt, it replaces. Even when you return to the conversation, the fracture remains. Try this. The next time someone speaks, put the screen down. Just for that moment, let your attention become a gift. Let your eyes stay still. Let silence be shared without distraction. Because in a world of constant flicker, undivided attention is rare and deeply felt. Imagine yourself waking, reaching for your phone before your feet find the floor. Within moments, a podcast plays or music drifts from a speaker. The room is filled. The commute is filled. Even tasks that once carried a quiet rhythm, folding clothes, walking down a hallway, now echo with curated sound. It feels like comfort, like energy. But over time, something else happens. Silence begins to feel unfamiliar, and eventually, unsafe. Long ago, silence was not emptiness, it was landscape. Ancient monks sought it in cloisters and caves, believing that only in quiet could the soul begin to speak. In indigenous rituals, long pauses in conversation were seen not as awkward, but as respectful, time for truth to surface. The early Greek philosophers, too, prized silence as a condition for insight, not just stillness. They understood what modern life often forgets. When sound never stops, something within you does. Today, we drown thought in stimulation. Music, media, chatter, often lovely, often meaningful, but constant. And in that constancy, the inner voice becomes faint. You stop noticing the subtle shifts of mood, the quiet tensions in your body, the truth rising beneath your surface thoughts. Insight needs space, not just mental space, but auditory space, room for stillness to bloom. Neuroscientists have found that silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's an active state. In silence, the brain shifts into a default mode, where it consolidates memory, processes emotion, makes connections. Creativity stirs here. So does self-awareness. But when noise fills every gap, the mind loses that terrain. Reflection becomes uncomfortable. Stillness begins to feel like something's missing, when in fact, it's what's most needed. Now imagine letting silence return. Not forever, just enough. A few minutes between songs, a walk without earbuds, a morning without a voice narrating your thoughts. At first, it may feel like absence, but stay with it. Beneath the quiet, something ancient waits. Not emptiness, but listening. Not boredom, but presence. The sound of your own mind, finally audible again. You say it without thinking. I've just been busy. It explains everything. Missed calls, unstarted projects, the growing distance between intention and action. Everyone understands. Being busy is accepted, even admired. But slowly, the word stops describing a condition and starts concealing a choice. Busy becomes a shield. It keeps questions away. It excuses delays. It creates the illusion of motion, even when nothing essential is moving. And the more you say it, the less you examine it. The schedule looks full, but full of what? There's a quiet difference between being busy and being absorbed, between urgency and importance. You might be checking tasks, answering messages, attending meetings, but still neglecting the things that actually matter: your creativity, your relationships, your rest. The word itself begins to hide something deeper: avoidance. Sometimes it's fear of starting, of failing, of slowing down enough to feel what you've been postponing. So you stay in motion, because motion feels like progress, even when it's just noise. Imagine replacing the phrase, "I've been busy," with something more honest. I haven't made time. I've been distracted. I've said yes to too much. These are harder truths, but they also offer you clarity. And from clarity, change. Being busy isn't failure, but misusing the word can quietly drain your life of meaning. You deserve a day that reflects your priorities, not just your pressures. There will always be tasks, but when you stop using busy as a badge, you can start choosing with intention again. And slowly, your time becomes yours, not just filled, but aligned. Imagine discovering something new: a book, a hobby, a person, a path. The excitement is immediate. Ideas bloom, energy surges. For a while, you feel alive in a way routine rarely allows. But then, without warning, the spark fades. You move on. Not because it failed you, but because it became familiar, and familiar feels dull. Throughout history, novelty has pulled at the human mind. Explorers left kingdoms for maps they hadn't drawn. Artists abandoned styles for the rush of reinvention. In every age, the new has whispered a promise: more. But there is a quiet cost. When beginnings are all you chase, you never arrive. Curiosity becomes escape. Excitement replaces connection. Modern life magnifies this. Endless scrolls, infinite choices. If one thing doesn't thrill, the next is seconds away. But the mind adapts, grows impatient, shallow, restless. What once enchanted now barely holds your gaze, and slowly the ability to stay fades. Yet meaning doesn't live at the surface. It waits in the layers beneath, the ones only revealed through time, repetition, and care. Depth grows where attention lingers. Devotion transforms the ordinary into the sacred. Now imagine staying, not out of duty, but curiosity. You return to the same thing again and again, until you see what wasn't visible at first. The thrill is quieter, but it lasts longer. And in that stillness, novelty is replaced by something richer, understanding. You finish the project, maybe it went well, maybe it didn't. Either way, you move on, quietly, quickly, already thinking about what's next. No pause, no unpacking, just the illusion of closure wrapped in momentum. But without reflection, there is no ending, only interruption. The mind keeps the file open, cluttering your mental desk. And worse, it misses the lesson, the insight that could have shaped your next attempt, the pattern that could have been interrupted instead of repeated. In older craft guilds, apprentices weren't allowed to begin a new piece without first reviewing the last. They'd walk through the process, what worked, what didn't, what they would never do again. The closing wasn't just about pride, it was about wisdom. They understood. The past doesn't teach you unless you ask it to. Today, we chase completion, finish the task, check the box. But we rarely stop to ask why it turned out the way it did. What began well but crumbled? What looked perfect but felt hollow? What sparked joy? What drained it? Without these questions, the same mistakes reappear in new forms. Deadlines slip again, energy wanes again, excitement fades too soon. We tell ourselves it's just how things go, but often it's just the past left unreviewed. Imagine ending differently, not with a judgment, but with a gentle inventory, a brief moment where you honor the effort, harvest the meaning, and release the weight. Closure, not just completion. Because every project is a mirror, and without looking into it, you might build the same shape again and not know why it keeps collapsing. Imagine walking into a store after a long day or scrolling through pages of things late at night. You tell yourself it's just a treat, a small comfort, a harmless distraction. You buy something simple. For a moment, there's a lift. The world softens. The newness is soothing. But soon, the feeling fades. Emotional spending is rarely about the thing itself. It's about filling a space inside, a silence, a tension, a longing for ease. Objects promise to patch these gaps, to offer a moment's relief, but relief never lasts. The package arrives, the tag is torn, the comfort dissolves. In earlier times, comfort was found elsewhere, through ritual, community, ritual, rest. A cup of tea shared, a slow walk at dusk. Even in scarcity, people leaned on each other more than things. But now, with a swipe or a click, comfort comes packaged and delivered. The danger isn't in owning things, it's in tying identity to them. When a mood is soothed by a purchase, the mind learns to crave that fix. The self becomes entangled with what can be bought and what always fades. Each object piles up, but the need remains. You may look around and wonder why the feeling never lasts, why the emptiness returns. It's because meaning can't be delivered to your doorstep. And comfort that endures asks for your presence, not your payment. Next time the urge arises, pause. Ask what you're truly seeking. Sometimes, it's not a thing. It's a moment, or a connection, or a gentle breath. You can't buy what lasts, but you can learn to find it. And imagine yourself confronted by a task unmet, a promise broken, a moment of falling short. Before the discomfort can fully register, the explanation is already there, reflexive, polished by repetition. I was too busy. Traffic was bad. That's just how I am. The words form a soft barrier between you and the raw edge of responsibility. You feel shielded, momentarily lighter, but the armor never really comes off. Excuses, once automatic, begin to shape the contours of your life. Throughout history, stories have warned of the dangers of self-deception. In ancient Greek myth, Narcissus wasted away gazing at his own reflection, blinded by his inability to see the truth beyond himself. In every tradition, the hardest lesson is not external challenge, but internal honesty. The courage to face what is uncomfortable without hiding behind circumstance. Modern psychology recognizes this pattern as self-justification. It feels protective, sparing you shame or embarrassment. But each time you default to excuse, you trade short-term comfort for long-term limitation. The mind becomes conditioned, less to problem-solving and more to avoidance. Over time, opportunities for growth are missed, not because you couldn't act, but because you never required yourself to try. The armor thickens, the world narrows. Excuses are habits of language, but also habits of belief. They teach you to expect less of yourself and to explain away what could be changed. And the more easily the words come, the more difficult it becomes to see who you are beneath them. Real growth, real strength, is not found in defense, but in exposure, in owning your choices, even when they fall short of your hopes. Now imagine meeting a mistake and letting the excuse go unsaid. Sitting in the raw truth for a moment longer. You might feel vulnerable at first, even naked, but in that nakedness, something real can grow. Accountability is not a weight to carry, but a doorway to movement. When the armor of excuse is set aside, your life expands, step by unshielded step. You wake each morning and step into the same familiar roles. The reliable one, the quiet one, the helper, the skeptic. The labels shaped by old circumstances, old expectations. You wear them so long, they start to feel like skin, not clothing. But with each repetition, your past self quietly becomes a kind of prison. These roles were formed for a reason. Maybe they protected you, won approval, made things easier. But life changes, and so do you. The problem is, the world often remembers your old script better than your new lines. People expect you to act a certain way, and sometimes you oblige, simply because it's easier than explaining who you are becoming. The mind does this too. It clings to identity for stability, repeating old stories even when they no longer serve. I've always been this way. People like me don't change, but the comfort of the known can quietly become a cage. Growth is uncomfortable. It asks you to disappoint some expectations, even your own, to risk being misunderstood, to leave behind habits and ways of seeing yourself that once felt like home. The moment you begin to step beyond the lines of your old role, there's uncertainty. Will you be accepted, or will you stand alone? Imagine letting those roles become looser, lighter, like coats you can take off, not anchors you must drag behind. Imagine saying, I am not only who I have been, but who I am choosing to become. The past shapes us, but it does not own us. To stay in old roles is to freeze in place, reciting lines to a script no one else remembers. To outgrow them is to risk, to stretch, to become. Your truest self is not a role, but a living story, always being rewritten, if you're willing to turn the page. Imagine yourself in conversation. You step aside in a hallway. Sorry. You ask a question. Sorry. You speak your mind, share your needs, even exist in a space that's crowded. Sorry, sorry, sorry. The word slips out before you notice, a reflex more than a choice. Each apology is small, but together they start to define the air around you. Historically, apologies were reserved for real harm, an acknowledgement, a ritual, a path back to trust. But over time, sorry became softer, more habitual, especially for those taught to keep the peace, to shrink, to smooth the edges for others. It is politeness at first, but repeated, it sends a deeper message, that your needs are interruptions, your presence an inconvenience, your existence something to be minimized. The world absorbs these cues. People begin to expect your retreat, your silence. You blend into the background, You apologize for taking up space, for feeling, for simply being. Now imagine holding the word back, just once. You move through the room without shrinking. You let your needs stand. You ask for what you want without apology. At first, it feels bold, almost unsettling. But in that quiet strength, something new takes root, a sense that your presence is allowed, not a burden. Over time, the world adapts to your confidence, and so do you. You meet someone new, the conversations flow, the smiles come easy. But over time, a subtle pattern emerges, a familiar tension, a recurring disappointment, a silent expectation. You notice it only faintly at first, then try to ignore it. After all, who wants to face the parts of themselves reflected back in another's eyes? But relationships are mirrors. They don't just show who the other person is, they reveal pieces of you, often hidden beneath daily routines. The way you react, the wounds you guard, the needs you don't speak aloud. Ignoring these echoes is like walking through a gallery blindfolded, missing the portraits that could teach you who you truly are. In ancient philosophy, wise teachers spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, projected onto others. They taught that to understand relationships, you must first understand the reflection within. Only then can you choose to change the dance or step away. Today, many rush from connection to connection, hoping the next will feel different. But when patterns go unnoticed, they repeat. Familiar conflicts, unspoken fears, repeated heartbreak. The mirror becomes a maze. Imagine pausing instead of running, listening deeply to the echoes. No blame, no judgment, just curiosity. What parts of you does this relationship call forth? What wounds does it touch? What growth might it invite? Because the relationships that challenge you are often the ones offering the clearest path to self-discovery. When you stop ignoring the patterns, you begin to see not just who they are, but who you can become. Imagine giving and giving, your time, your energy, your patience. At first, it feels good, needed, useful. You offer help before anyone asks. Say yes before you consider your own needs. The world praises this selflessness, but quietly, something inside you begins to thin. Overgiving is celebrated, but rarely questioned. The more you put others first, the more you disappear from your own life. It starts with small things, an evening given up, a dream postponed, an opinion swallowed. You tell yourself it's kindness, that you're strong enough to carry everyone else's load. But each time, a tiny resentment flickers in a hidden corner. Not because you don't care, but because care has no limit, and your boundaries begin to blur. Ancient cultures knew the wisdom of balance. A full vessel pours freely, but an empty one cannot give. In rituals, people gave thanks for what they had, but also rested, received, filled themselves again. Modern life often forgets this. The more you give, the more is asked. Soon, you may find yourself exhausted, present for others, but absent for yourself. Resentment grows where needs go unmet. It's not a flaw, it's a signal, a gentle call to notice your own emptiness. Try giving to yourself quietly. Refuse one request. Say yes to rest. Fill your own cup even when no one is watching. Because true generosity grows from abundance, not depletion. Imagine yourself struggling with a problem, a task that grows heavier with each attempt, a feeling that will not quiet, a decision that never quite resolves. You move through your day determined, silent, certain that self-reliance is strength. When someone offers help, you smile and decline. When you falter, you tighten your grip. You whisper to yourself, I should be able to handle this. And slowly, without meaning to, the world begins to narrow. Throughout history, independence has been celebrated as a sign of maturity, wisdom, even heroism. The lone wanderer, the solitary thinker, the self-made innovator, these are stories we repeat. Yet in older traditions, vulnerability was woven into the fabric of community. Ancient hunter-gatherers survived because they shared burdens. In indigenous circles, asking for help was not weakness, but a sign of belonging. a reminder that no one thrives alone. Modern psychology now shows that refusing to ask for help does not build strength, but chips away at resilience. The more you isolate yourself, the more pressure builds, the harder it becomes to reach out, the deeper the sense of separation grows. Over time, self-sufficiency turns brittle, transforming independence into armor and loneliness into habit. You miss out not only on solutions, but on the healing that comes from being seen, known, supported. There is a subtle power in asking, a willingness to be incomplete, to admit uncertainty, to trust another with your imperfection. This act of vulnerability is not surrender, it is connection. When you ask for help, you give someone else permission to do the same. You remind both of you that strength is not just endurance, but openness. Now imagine letting the words form, "Can you help me?" Not as a last resort, but as an ordinary gesture. Notice how the walls soften, how the distance shrinks. The world feels a little wider, because independence without vulnerability is not freedom, it's isolation in disguise, and the first step out is simply reaching. You hear it in stories, in songs, in quiet conversations late at night, the idea that true worth is found in struggle, that pain is proof of depth, that endurance is a badge of honor. You start to wear your hardships like armor, reciting your burdens as if they make you more real. Over time, suffering becomes not just an obstacle, but a kind of identity. This is the quiet danger of romanticizing the struggle. You begin to believe that meaning can only be found on the hardest road. You push yourself to exhaustion, refuse help, accept discomfort as a virtue. When things come easily, you doubt their value. You distrust ease, and slowly, pain becomes familiar, almost comforting, because it feels earned. But glorifying pain is a trap. It turns life into a contest of who has endured more. It trains your mind to seek difficulty, to stay where it hurts, because leaving would mean letting go of the narrative you've built. In the process, you overlook gentler paths, small joys, and the grace of ease. The world does not reward you for suffering, it only offers more of the same. Growth can happen in challenge, but it also lives in rest, in laughter, in moments of relief. You don't need to suffer to be worthy of happiness. The story that says otherwise is just that, a story. One you are allowed to rewrite. Imagine allowing yourself to release the struggle, not denying pain, but refusing to idolize it. Accepting help without guilt. Trusting that you can grow without always hurting. This is not weakness, it's wisdom. There is courage in surviving hardship, but there is also wisdom in seeking peace. You are not here to be broken and rebuilt endlessly. You are here to live, fully, gently, and with the freedom to step out of struggle when you can. Imagine spending your days in spaces that feel half-lived. The lighting is dull, the air stale, the sounds never quite inspiring. You tell yourself it's temporary, that your ambitions exist above the environment. Maybe you hang a picture, tidy a desk, but the room remains the same, a place you pass through, not a place that lifts you. Throughout history, people have shaped their environments as much as their environments have shaped them. Ancient Greeks built open forums for ideas to breathe. Monasteries were designed for quiet clarity. Even the smallest homes reflected care, swept floors, tended gardens, colors chosen with intention. The message was clear: where you are matters. But in modern life, it's easy to believe you're immune. That the cluttered, dim, or uninspired space you tolerate cannot touch your inner world. Yet, day by day, your energy adjusts downward. Creativity dulls. Standards soften. You adapt, but the adaptation isn't growth, it's shrinkage. Now imagine pausing long enough to see your environment for what it is, a mirror. A quiet influence shaping thoughts, moods, even your sense of possibility. With each change, no matter how small, you reclaim a piece of yourself. A clear surface, a plant, a window open to the air. Over time, the space lifts. And in that lift, you remember what it feels like to rise. You catch yourself saying it again. It's not that bad. The small discomfort, the creeping stress, the quiet erosion of peace, all dismissed with those words. They roll off your tongue like a shield, a gentle denial that softens reality just enough to keep moving forward. But every time you downplay what's troubling you, you teach your brain a dangerous lesson. That pain is normal. That struggle is expected. That slow damage doesn't deserve attention. You train yourself to tolerate what should be noticed. In old healing traditions, acknowledgement was the first step to repair. The body and mind were treated not by ignoring symptoms, but by naming them, honoring the whisper before it became a scream. Saying, "It's not that bad," would have been like ignoring the first tremors before an earthquake. Today, we live in constant motion, pushed to minimize discomfort so we can keep up. But the cost is hidden in plain sight. Small wounds go untreated. Boundaries weaken. The mind grows numb to signals it needs to hear. This isn't about exaggeration or self-pity. It's about truth, recognizing what weighs on you before it weighs you down. Imagine for a moment, instead of brushing aside your feelings, you lean into them. You name them honestly, without judgment. That moment of truth is a pause, a break in the pattern that allows healing to begin. Because what you ignore today can become the weight you carry tomorrow. Saying it's not that bad might feel like strength, but real strength is in facing what is, no matter how small, and deciding you deserve better. Imagine passing a mirror and glancing away before your gaze can settle. Not out of vanity, but something quieter. A gentle discomfort. A reluctance to really see who's looking back. The reflection becomes less a surface and more a threshold, one you hesitate to cross. You skip the mirror, not because you dislike your appearance, but because meeting your own eyes asks for honesty. It's easier to move quickly, to focus on the day, the tasks, the world outside. But in every skipped glance, a small distance grows between you and yourself. Historically, mirrors were rare, even sacred. To see your reflection was to face the self, not just the features, but the person inhabiting them. Rituals invited you to pause, to meet your own gaze, to acknowledge change, pain, longing, growth. But now, with mirrors everywhere, the ritual is lost. We hurry past, half seeing, half ignoring. Avoidance becomes habit. Over time, the reflection feels unfamiliar, like a letter from someone you used to know. Self-recognition thins. The face is yours, but the connection dims. To avoid your own eyes is to skip a conversation only you can have. Try meeting your reflection for a moment, not to criticize, not to judge, just to witness. Notice the softness, the fatigue, the quiet strength. Allow yourself to be seen by the only person who truly knows every version of you, because self-acceptance begins with recognition, and that starts with a single, honest look. Imagine yourself in a conversation. Someone asks a question, and before the last word even settles, you're already answering. Your voice leaps in, eager to fill the gap, to prove understanding, to avoid the awkward space of waiting. The words come easily, but as they leave your mouth, you sense they don't quite fit. Your thoughts scatter, your meaning thins, and the power of your presence slips away in the hurry. Across cultures, the wisdom of the pause is ancient. In the councils of old, elders would wait for silence to settle before speaking, letting the dust of the question fall. In Zen practice, a teacher might let a student's words hang in the air, trusting that truth emerges in the spaces between sound. Even in classical rhetoric, the pause was not an absence but an instrument, a place where intention gathered, where meaning was sharpened. Modern neuroscience affirms this old wisdom. When you pause before responding, your brain has a chance to sift through reactions, to weigh emotion against intention, to choose a response instead of a reflex. The pause is not empty. It's an active moment where clarity takes shape and power gathers. Rushing, by contrast, scatters that power, leaving your words thinner, less rooted, less yours. In a world that prizes speed and certainty, silence can feel risky. You worry you'll seem uncertain, unprepared, disengaged. But the opposite is often true. Those who pause are heard as thoughtful, confident, and genuinely attentive. The pause draws people in, signals respect, and makes every word land with more weight. Now imagine answering with space, letting the question breathe before you do. Notice how your thoughts organize themselves, how your intention crystallizes. Your words become fewer, but richer. The power returns, not just in what you say, but in how you claim the space to say it. In the quiet, clarity finds you, and in your voice, it finally speaks. You answer messages late at night, work through weekends, wear exhaustion like a badge, as if tiredness is proof of importance. You talk about being busy, as if life's value is measured by the weight of your calendar. There's a quiet pride in it, a sense that pushing yourself harder means you matter more. But beneath the surface, overwork becomes its own emptiness. The constant motion blurs the reason for moving. Achievements lose their meaning, replaced by numbers, deadlines, unfinished lists. You begin to crave the next task, not because it fulfills you, but because stillness feels unfamiliar, almost wrong. Hustle is often celebrated. We're told to outwork, outlast, outpace. But when work becomes the only measure, something vital is lost. The joy of rest, the quiet of reflection, the space for relationships, for wandering thoughts, for days that have no plan at all. Life shrinks to a series of obligations, and every pause is filled with guilt. Slowly, you begin to mistake busyness for worth. You forget what brought you here, the curiosity, the love, the small delights that used to color your days. Pride in overwork is a mask. It covers emptiness with effort and loneliness with lists. It keeps you moving, but never arriving. Imagine setting the work aside, even for a moment, letting yourself be enough without earning it, not because the job is done, but because you are already whole. Success does not require depletion. Worth does not demand exhaustion. The world rarely tells you to rest, but your own life is waiting beneath the rush, quiet, patient, wanting more than your labor. Pride does not have to mean pain. Sometimes the bravest thing is to stop, to rest, to remember that you are not what you do, but who you are when you finally let yourself be. Imagine waking each day without an anchor, no North Star, no core belief guiding your steps. The world is full of noise and invitation. A new trend, a new urgency, a new crisis. You find yourself pulled in many directions, each promising meaning or belonging. But beneath the movement, a quiet drift takes hold. You respond, you react, you chase, but nothing feels lasting. Throughout history, philosophy was not just debate or theory. It was a practice, a compass for ordinary life. In ancient Greece, it shaped the smallest choices. In Eastern traditions, guiding principles offered peace amid chaos. Even the simplest creeds, a code of honor, a family value, a line from a poem, provided a foundation beneath the shifting world. Without such foundations, you become porous. Other people's values seep in. Every shiny thing becomes a possible path. You measure yourself by borrowed standards, caught in the tides of approval or fear. The mind grows restless, never quite arriving, never quite at home. Now, imagine choosing a handful of principles, not rigid rules, but gentle truths, enough to return to when the world pulls at you. Slowly, you find that life narrows and deepens. Not every path calls your name. Some can be left alone, and in that clarity, your steps become your own. You carry your days like a bag stuffed with endless errands, fleeting moments, and quiet routines. The thought of death, distant, uncomfortable, sits tucked away, like a shadow you choose not to look at. Ignoring mortality feels safer, easier, like a pause button on urgency. But this very avoidance whispers a subtle truth, a life half-lived. Since ancient times, cultures have invited reflection on death, not to frighten, but to awaken. The Stoics spoke of memento mori, remember you must die, as a call to live fully. In Japanese tradition, Mono no Aware teaches us to cherish the ephemeral, to find beauty in impermanence. These reminders weren't morbid, they were mirrors. When you forget that time is finite, hours slip away unnoticed. You spend minutes scrolling, tasks multiplying, dreams deferred. Without reverence for your own limited days, life becomes a series of distractions rather than deliberate acts. You live as if there will always be more time, but time's currency is fragile and fleeting. Imagine for a moment holding the awareness of mortality gently, like a fragile flower in your palm. Not as a burden, but as a guide, shaping your choices, your presence, your gratitude. When death is acknowledged, every breath gains weight, every gesture, meaning. Ignoring death doesn't protect you from it. It only blinds you to the richness waiting in each moment, the laughter, the silence, the love, the ache. To live without this reverence is to walk half blind through your own story. So pause, breathe, remember, because life, lived with the shadow of death, shines brightest of all.